Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving a long, empty stretch of highway in New Mexico, headed east toward Clovis after visiting a friend in Roswell. It was close to 1 a.m., the kind of late where the desert air cools fast and the sky feels huge and sharp. The road was dead quiet, no cars behind me, none ahead, not even the distant glow of a town. Just my headlights, the pavement, and the steady hum of the tires. I wasn't tired yet, just zoning into that late-night driving rhythm where everything around you fades into background noise. The radio was off because it kept crackling with static between stations, and my phone was out of service for miles. It didn't bother me, I kind of liked the emptiness. About 20 minutes past the county line, the sky ahead changed. Not dramatically, just slightly darker, like a slow-moving shadow passing overhead. I thought maybe a storm cloud was drifting in, but the stars were visible everywhere else, bright and steady. The darkness didn't look like cloud cover. It was too smooth, too even in shape. It stretched across the sky in a soft arc, dimming a patch of stars in a clean sweep. Not blinking them out, but washing over them like sliding tinted glass across a window. At first, I thought it was my windshield fogging, so I flipped on the defroster. The glass stayed clear. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, and realized the darker patch wasn't on the glass at all. It was in the sky, moving. Slowly, deliberately. My foot eased off the gas without me meaning to. The car dropped from 70 to around 60. The darkness kept gliding overhead, silent and steady. It didn't ripple or waver like clouds. It didn't distort the stars behind it. The stars didn't twinkle. They just vanished under it, then reappeared behind it as it passed. It was like watching a huge shadow drift across the night, but with no source. I rolled the window down halfway. The air that came in was still and cold. No wind, no sound except the engine and the tires. The darker patch moved over the highway and continued past me. I craned my neck to look up through the windshield, then the side window. I couldn't see any edges or shape, just the absence of starlight, gliding like a single smooth sheet. It didn't speed up or slow down. It just kept the same silent motion. As it passed directly above me, something changed in the air, a faint pressure. Not physical, more like the sensation of walking under a heavy ceiling. My ears didn't pop, but they felt aware, like the air had thickened for just a second. The car's dashboard lights flickered once, only once, just a quick dip in brightness. The engine didn't sputter, the steering didn't pull, everything kept running normally. I rolled the window all the way down and stuck my hand out. No wind at all. The night should have had at least a little movement, but it felt like the atmosphere was holding perfectly still while the shadow crossed overhead. The darker patch slid further across the sky, moving toward the western horizon. As it drifted away, the stars behind it brightened again, sharp and clean, like nothing had interrupted them. I slowed the car to a near crawl without realizing it. The highway stretched empty in both directions. My headlights didn't reach far enough to make me feel grounded. Everything past that small beam felt too wide and too quiet. A few seconds later, the darkness thinned. Not faded, thinned, as if becoming transparent. The missing stars returned one by one. The sky regained its normal depth. The strange patch smoothed out, dissolved into the night, and was gone. Completely gone. I kept driving, gripping the wheel a little tighter than before. Nothing else happened for several miles. The air regained its usual feel. A breeze returned, brushing through the open window. My dashboard light stayed steady. After maybe 10 minutes, my phone buzzed with a delayed text, like service snapped back suddenly. When I checked the time, I noticed something odd. It had jumped forward 6 minutes. Not much, but more than it should have, considering I hadn't been driving long enough for that gap. I checked the car's clock too. Same time. Both matched each other perfectly, but something felt off. I tried to replay the moments since the dark patch passed overhead, but the timeline felt slippery. Not missing, just blurred at the edges, like my brain hadn't registered those minutes cleanly. The sky behind me looked completely normal, too normal. Stars bright, moon clear, no sign anything had moved across it. When I got home later that night, I checked a satellite tracking site out of habit. Nothing had been overhead in that part of the state at that time. No weather balloons, no aircraft, no cloud cover on the radar. I didn't tell anyone at first. It felt too vague, like trying to explain a dream you know wasn't a dream. But the memory of that clean, smooth darkness, moving with purpose, blocking out the stars without touching the rest of the night, has stuck with me ever since. Even now, whenever I drive that stretch of highway, I keep glancing up at the sky, half expecting to see the stars dim in one perfect sweep again. I saw the light on a late-night walk behind the old distribution warehouses on Fowler Road. I wasn't supposed to be in that area. Security didn't patrol often, but it was still technically off-limits after dark. I'd started walking there during the pandemic because it was quiet and close to my apartment. Empty loading docks, stretches of cracked pavement, no people. It helped me clear my head. That night, I couldn't sleep. It was humid for early September, the kind of muggy heat that sticks to your skin even after the sun goes down. I left my apartment around 11:45 p.m. and took my usual route along the fence line. Crickets were going crazy in the weeds and power lines hummed quietly overhead. Nothing unusual. When I reached the backside of the biggest warehouse, Building 6, I saw it. A dim light hovering above the far end of the roof. It wasn't bright, just a small, soft glow, almost the color of a warm LED bulb. But it looked out of place because nothing on that roof should have been turned on. The building had been half abandoned for years. Most of the exterior lights were broken or removed. The glow didn't flicker or sway, it just hung there, maybe 5 or 6 feet above the flat roof, perfectly still. I stopped walking. The warehouse sat about 50 yards away, but I had a clear line of sight. The glow remained steady, not pulsing, not drifting, just present. I thought maybe it was a drone, but it wasn't bright enough. And drones have shape, they have blinking markers, they buzz. This light made no sound and there was no outline behind it, nothing to suggest physical hardware. I stared at it for a while, waiting for it to behave like something normal, fade, drift, cut out, but it didn't. It was so steady that at some point I wondered if it was just a weird reflection off a window or some leftover roof fixture I'd never noticed before. But there were no windows on that side of the building, and no fixture I knew of floated above the roofline. I took a few steps closer. The crickets continued their noise in the weeds, but it felt oddly backgrounded, like the sound wasn't reaching me at full volume. The glow stayed still. I walked until I reached the chain link fence that separated the service road from the warehouse lot. The light was clearer now, hovering maybe 20 feet to the left of a rusted ventilation unit. Still no flicker, no sound, just a perfect sphere of dim orange-white light. I pulled out my phone without thinking, intending to zoom in and see if I could get a better look. The instant I lifted the phone, the light reacted. Not dramatically, just a tiny, subtle movement, a shift upward, maybe 6 inches. Then it paused as if waiting. I froze, phone halfway up. The light held still again. I raised the phone a little higher. The light moved again, this time sliding sideways a foot or two, smooth as a bubble drifting on water, except there was no wind and no wavering, just a deliberate glide. My heart started thumping harder, partly from adrenaline, partly from confusion. I lowered the phone slightly, and the light stopped moving immediately. I stayed like that for several seconds, barely breathing. Then, slowly, I lifted the phone again. The light lifted too. A perfectly synchronized movement, up as I raised the phone, pausing when I stopped. It wasn't random. It wasn't drifting on a breeze. It was responding to me or to the phone. I lowered my hand to my side. The light descended the same small distance I had lowered the phone, then stopped again, hanging motionless above the roof. The crickets went silent, all at once. The hum of the power lines seemed to flatten too, fading into a low, constant pressure rather than a sound. The whole area felt suspended in a way I can't describe well, like time took a half step sideways. I backed away from the fence, one slow step at a time. The light didn't follow. It didn't move at all now. It had returned to perfect stillness. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in minutes and walked backward another step. I wasn't even trying to make sense of it at that moment. I just knew I didn't want to provoke it again. Then curiosity got the better of me. I raised the phone one more time, but very slowly this time, watching the light as closely as I could. Nothing happened at first. 2 seconds passed. 3. Then the light shifted again, the smallest movement yet, almost like a tremble. Before I could react, the phone buzzed in my hand. Just one buzz, like a single silent notification. I glanced down instinctively. The phone screen was blank, not off, just blank white, like a frozen web page with no content. When I looked back up, the light above the roof was gone. Completely gone. No fading, no upward motion, just not there anymore. The crickets resumed instantly, loud enough to make me flinch. The power lines reclaimed their hum. The heat pressed against my skin again. The world snapped back into its normal texture as if someone had released a pause button. I stood there, staring at the empty space where the light had hovered. My phone screen finally unfroze and returned to the lock screen. The time read 12:04 a.m. I checked the camera roll, no new photos, no glitchy half-loaded images, nothing to show I'd even tried to record anything. I lowered the phone and realized I was shaking. I didn't go back toward Building 6. I turned around and walked home at a fast but steady pace, trying not to look over my shoulder even though every instinct told me to. On the sidewalk near my apartment, I stopped and checked the sky. Clear. Normal. A couple of stars peeking through light pollution. No strange glows. But when I unlocked my phone again, something caught my eye. My clock widget had reset to 12 a.m. and was now showing 12:06. Every other clock, microwave, oven, my car's dashboard showed 12:14, 8 minutes unaccounted for. I stayed awake the rest of the night, half expecting to see another glow above the roofline across the parking lot. Nothing appeared. Everything outside stayed ordinary. But the next evening, when I walked past Building 6 on my way home, I noticed something different. A faint, round scorch mark on the metal roof, exactly where the light had hovered. I was lying in bed when it happened, sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning. I hadn't been asleep long. I remember staring at the ceiling earlier, listening to the heater cycle on and off, trying to get comfortable. My room in my apartment outside Ellensburg was always colder than the rest of the place, and that night the air felt especially still. I must have drifted off for maybe half an hour when I noticed the light. At first it was subtle, a soft brightness behind my closed eyelids, the same way sunlight looks when you nap in the afternoon. I remember thinking it was weird because my curtains were shut tight and there were no streetlights close enough to shine into my room. But the brightness wasn't a flash. It was gradual, steady, growing. My first thought was that I'd accidentally left the hall light on, but the glow didn't feel yellow or warm. It was cool even, clean. Not like a bulb, more like reflection off snow, except there wasn't any snow that night. I kept my eyes shut for a few seconds, trying to figure out what could cause it. The heater wasn't running, so it wasn't the thermostat screen. My phone was face down. The neighbors didn't have floodlights, and the brightness didn't stay at one level. It kept increasing, slowly like something approaching the window. My heartbeat sped up. I opened my eyes. Total darkness. Not just ordinary darkness. Thick, absolute black. My eyes should have adjusted after a second or two. They didn't. It was as if the room had swallowed the light I'd just felt against my eyelids. I blinked a few times to make sure I was actually awake. I reached over to my nightstand for my phone, trying not to overreact. My hand brushed the wood surface, found the charging cable, then the phone. I tapped the screen. The lock screen lit up. 3:19 a.m., but that didn't line up. The last time I'd checked the clock before dozing off, it had said 3:12. I stared at the time again, trying to piece it together. 7 minutes. It felt like maybe 20 seconds had passed between the bright glow and me opening my eyes. But the clock said I'd lost 7 minutes. I sat up slowly. The room remained pitch dark, the kind of dark that makes you second guess whether your eyes are open. I held the phone up to see around the room. Everything looked normal. Dresser, door, blinds still drawn, nothing out of place. I got out of bed and opened the curtains slightly, expecting maybe a car outside or some weird natural light. But the parking lot was dark and empty. No headlights, no moon, no movement. I closed the curtains again and stood there, listening. Silence. Not even the sound of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It was like the whole apartment complex had gone quiet at once. I went to the living room to see if the power had gone out, but the digital clock on the microwave was on. The heater kicked back on as I stepped into the hall. Everything sounded normal again. I walked back into my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. The air still felt strange. Not thick, not warm or cold. Just wrong in a hard-to-place way, like the room hadn't caught up to the rest of the apartment. I lay back down and shut my eyes, trying to replay the moment. The gradual brightening, the sudden darkness, the clock jump. I wondered if maybe I'd fallen back asleep without realizing it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the brightness had been real, like someone turning up a dimmer outside my field of vision. Eventually, I grabbed my phone again and opened the camera app, pointing it at the window. Nothing unusual. Same blinds, same contours, no reflection of light, no odd glare. When I finally tried to go back to sleep, it didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I expected the room to brighten again. I kept lifting my eyelids just to check, finding the same darkness staring back. Around 4-something, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I knew, my alarm was buzzing. Morning light seeped through the cracks in the curtains. Real light, soft and warm and familiar. I sat up slowly and looked around the room again. Nothing looked disturbed, but something made me walk to the window. When I pulled back the curtain, the glass felt colder than usual, like someone had pressed a flat block of ice against the outside before dawn. The weather app said it hadn't dropped below freezing, and the other windows in the apartment felt normal. Only my bedroom had that cold sheen. I dressed and stepped outside before heading to work. The parking lot looked the same. No weird tire tracks, no lights, nothing burned or melted. But I kept glancing at my window from the outside, half expecting to see, I don't know, something. Work was normal enough that I forgot about it for a few hours. But when I got back home that evening, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. My alarm clock, an old battery backup one I kept on the nightstand, was flashing 12. The power hadn't gone out. Everything else still had the correct time. The heater had run through the day. My fridge clock was fine. Only the clock next to me when I woke up had reset. I replaced the batteries just in case and set the time again. But even then, I couldn't get rid of the sense that whatever had happened wasn't just a sleep glitch. That night, when I lay down again, I kept my eyes open longer than usual, just watching the dark ceiling, trying to reassure myself nothing strange would happen. It didn't. But for weeks after, I woke up at random times with a lingering impression, not a memory exactly, just a sensation, that my room had been brighter a moment before. A soft glow behind my eyelids that vanished the instant I opened them. And each time, I checked the clock first thing. Always the right time. Always normal. But I still can't explain how 7 minutes slipped by in a room that was perfectly dark the moment I opened my eyes. I woke up to my car alarm blaring at 3:14 a.m. It startled me out of a dead sleep, sharp enough that for a second I couldn't tell if the sound was part of a dream. Then the second round of honking hit, and my heart jumped. I keep my car parked in the driveway right outside my bedroom window, so when the alarm goes off, it sounds like it's practically inside the house. I rolled out of bed, grabbed my phone, and stumbled toward the window, half expecting to see someone messing with the door or a raccoon trying to climb inside. But the driveway was empty. No movement, no shadows, just my car flashing its headlights and blasting the alarm into the quiet street. I cursed under my breath, threw on a jacket, and headed for the front door. The night air rushed in the moment I stepped outside, cool, damp, and unusually still. No wind at all, not even the slightest rustle in the trees that line the edge of my yard. I walked down the steps, hitting the fob repeatedly to shut the alarm off. The honking finally stopped, leaving a ringing silence behind it. For a moment, I just stood there barefoot on the driveway, trying to understand what had triggered it. The car is old, sure, but the alarm has never gone off on its own. It's always been tied to something, someone tugging a handle, a neighbor's kid bumping it with a basketball, that kind of thing. I walked around the car slowly, using my phone's flashlight to check the doors and windows. Nothing looked disturbed. No fresh scratches, no footprints nearby, no sign anyone had approached it. Then I noticed the glow. Up near the end of the driveway, just above the fence line, a faint white light drifted upward. It wasn't bright, more like the glow of a distant lantern, soft and hazy, barely more than a suggestion of brightness. But it was definitely moving, rising into the air with a slowness that made my stomach tighten. I froze. The glow didn't flicker. It didn't change shape. It just kept rising, steady and smooth, as if following an invisible path. At first, I thought it might be a drone, but there was no sound, no hum, no buzzing. The air remained absolutely silent. I took a small step backward without meaning to. Gravel shifted under my foot, and for some reason, that tiny noise felt too loud. The glow continued upward, passing the height of the telephone pole at the edge of the street. As it climbed, the light thinned slightly, like it was dispersing, but the glow didn't fade. It just stretched. My phone pulsed in my hand. One buzz, no notification showing. The screen brightness dipped for a second before returning to normal. I pointed the flashlight toward the glow, even though I knew it wouldn't reach that high. Still, for one brief moment, as the beam angled upward, the glow hesitated. Just for a second. Then it kept rising. By the time it reached the low cloud layer, it had become more elongated, like a smudge of milk against the sky. The clouds brightened faintly where it touched, a soft, widening halo that lasted maybe 2 seconds before the glow disappeared completely into the overcast. The exact moment it vanished, every insect in the neighborhood went silent. No crickets, no night birds, no distant traffic hum, just a smooth, unnatural quiet stretching over the street. I swallowed hard and checked my car again, as if looking at something familiar would bring the world back to normal. The headlights had stopped flashing. The interior lights were off. Everything about the car looked perfectly fine, too fine. Like whatever had happened wasn't related to the car at all, except that the alarm had noticed something before I did. I walked back toward the porch, checking over my shoulder every few steps. The clouds looked normal again. No bright spots, no shapes, just low morning fog creeping towards sunrise. Inside the house, the microwave clock was blinking. Not 12, like after a power outage, just blinking. 3:14 a.m., the exact time I'd woken up. I reset it, figured maybe the alarm surge had triggered something in the electrical system. But when I checked the living room clock, it was normal. My phone still read the correct time. Everything else was fine. Only the microwave clock had stopped at 3:14. I made coffee, even though it was too early, hoping the routine would settle the weird feeling in my stomach. But the whole time, I kept glancing at the window, half expecting the glow to come back down the same way it had gone up. It didn't. Around 6 a.m., the sun finally started to brighten the street, and I felt the tension in my body let up just enough that I could breathe normally again. I stepped outside to check for any remaining signs. The driveway looked untouched, the fence looked normal. But the air had that faint smell of ozone, sharp and metallic, almost like the aftermath of lightning. Except there hadn't been lightning. I crouched near the end of the driveway where I'd first seen the glow rise. The gravel there looked slightly disturbed, but that could have been me stepping around in the dark. I stood there for a minute, listening. Birds eventually began to chirp again, one by one. The neighborhood returned to its usual morning sounds. The world looked perfectly ordinary. But the feeling I'd had when the glow rose, that slow, deliberate movement upward, the way the air seemed to hold its breath, that stayed with me. That night, before I went to bed, I made sure the car was locked 3 times. I tested the alarm. I checked the driveway again. It was calm, dark, quiet. But when I turned off the bedroom light, a strange thought hit me out of nowhere. If the alarm hadn't gone off, I never would have seen the glow at all. I was stargazing from the back field behind my cousin Lena's place in eastern Wyoming when it happened. Her house sat a good quarter-mile off the main road, surrounded by tall grass and open sky. I'd gone out there to help her mend some fencing, and after dinner, I wandered outside with a blanket and a thermos, just wanting to unwind. It was one of those dry, chilly nights where the air feels thin and the stars look close enough to touch. I lay down on the blanket and let my eyes adjust. The sky was packed with stars, more than I ever saw back home in the city. The Milky Way was a pale band stretching across everything, and for a while that was all I focused on. Nothing strange, nothing out of the ordinary. Just a quiet night. I don't know how long I'd been watching before I noticed the pulsing. A single star. a little to the right of center, brightened and dimmed in a steady rhythm. Not twinkling, stars always twinkle, but pulsing, a slow, even beat. Bright, dim, bright, dim, exactly the same interval each time. I sat up slightly, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Sometimes when you stare too long, your vision glitches, so I blinked hard and looked away for a moment. When I looked back, the star was still doing it. Same rhythm, same intensity. I tried to find another star doing something similar so I could chalk it up to the atmosphere, but everything else looked normal. Steady flicker from distant turbulence, nothing unusual. Only that one star pulsed. I watched it for maybe a full minute. The rhythm didn't change. I even counted along under my breath. Each pulse was a little over a second apart. Too exact to be random refraction. A breeze moved through the grass beside me. Then it stopped almost immediately, as if someone had turned off a fan. The air became completely still. Even the insects in the grass quieted down. The pulsing continued. Bright, dim. Bright, dim. I reached for my phone. The moment my hand touched it, before I even unlocked it, the pulsing star went still. It didn't fade or blink out. It just stopped pulsing and joined the rest of the sky, indistinguishable from the stars around it. I froze with my thumb on the screen. I waited 10 seconds. Nothing happened. I set the phone down on the blanket, keeping my eyes on the same spot. Another 10 seconds. Still nothing. I felt a weird tension building in the air, like the quiet had weight to it. The insects still weren't making noise. The breeze didn't pick back up. Even the distant highway, usually a soft hum, sounded muted. I lay back down slowly. Almost immediately, the star pulsed again. One soft throb of light, then another. Same rhythm, same brightness changes, like it had waited for me to settle before starting again. My throat tightened a little. I told myself it had to be some kind of atmospheric distortion. Maybe a satellite. Maybe something else that would make sense if I Googled it. But nothing about its behavior matched anything I knew. I lifted my hand toward my phone, not touching it this time, just reaching. The star stopped again, instantly. Not gradually, as if someone had flipped a switch. I lowered my hand. The star stayed still, ordinary. I waited. A full 30 seconds passed before it pulsed again. One slow, steady beat, then another, as if resuming right where it had left off. A knot formed in my stomach. I tested it again, slowly raising my hand an inch or two. The star froze mid-pulse. The brightness held exactly where it was, unmoving. I lowered my hand, 25 seconds this time before it resumed. Bright, dim, bright, dim. The silence around me deepened. I don't know how else to describe it. It felt like the night itself was aware of me noticing something I wasn't supposed to notice. My phone buzzed suddenly on the blanket. I jumped. When I looked, there was no notification. The screen had lit up on its own for a brief second, then gone dark again. When I looked back at the sky, the pulsing had stopped. Not paused. Stopped. The star remained steady like all the others. Not a trace of the rhythmic brightening left. I kept watching, waiting for one more pulse. One hint that I hadn't imagined all of it. It didn't return. The insects started chirping again a few minutes later. The breeze picked up. A truck rolled by on the highway, normal as ever. Everything slipped back into a comfortable, familiar quiet. I stayed out there longer than I needed to, partly hoping it would start again, and partly hoping it wouldn't. The star never pulsed again that night. When I finally went inside, Lena asked if I'd been stargazing the whole time, and joked that I'd probably fall asleep out there. I didn't mention what I'd seen. Later, lying in the guest room, I opened the star map app on my phone and tried to figure out which star it had been, but my memory of its exact position felt fuzzier than it should have been. I couldn't match it to anything confidently. The next night, I went back out to the same spot. The stars looked normal, all of them. Normal distance, normal shimmer, nothing pulsing, nothing reacting. I was driving through the farmland outside my town late one Saturday night, taking the long way home because I needed to clear my head. It was early September, warm but breezy, and the roads were empty in that way they get after 11 p.m. when everyone else has already settled in. The sky was clear enough to see stars, though a bit washed out from the humidity. Most of the farms along that stretch had already finished harvest prep, so the fields looked clean and flat, just rows of dark soil with pockets of leftover stalks. The road cut between them in a straight line that seemed to go on forever. I had the window cracked to let the cool air in, and the only sounds were the hum of my tires and the occasional insect bouncing off the windshield. About 10 miles out, I noticed a pale light in the distance. At first, I thought it was a yard light. Some farms keep them on all night, but this one didn't look anchored. It wasn't sitting on a post. It was too low to be a plane or helicopter. It looked like it was hovering right above the fields. I slowed down a bit as I got closer. The light stayed steady, not bright, not flickering. Just a soft orb of pale white floating maybe 15 feet above the crops on the north side of the road. It had a strange quality to it, almost like it wasn't shining outward but glowing from within, like a frosted bulb. I rolled down the window more, expecting to hear something, maybe a generator or machinery, but the night was silent. I stopped the car about 100 yards away and just watched. The orb didn't move laterally or drift. It stayed exactly where it was, perfectly still above the field. The edges weren't sharp, but they weren't fuzzy either. It was almost too clean looking, like it didn't quite match anything around it. For a while, nothing happened. I sat there waiting for some normal explanation to show itself. A drone, maybe. A weird lighting rig, something. But the orb just hung there, indifferent to me. Eventually, I put the hazard lights on and stepped out of the car. The gravel shoulder crunched under my shoes, and the noise felt too loud in the quiet. I kept expecting a dog to bark from one of the farmhouses. Nothing. The orb stayed where it was. I walked a little closer, not too far from the car. I didn't want to lose the feeling of having something familiar behind me. The air felt strangely flat, no wind, no bug sounds, not even the rustle of dry corn stalks. Just silence and this pale orb sitting above the field like it had always been there. Then, without any buildup, it started to rise. Not fast, not slow, just upward, maintaining the exact same speed the entire time. Smooth, mechanical, silent. No wobble, no acceleration, nothing to indicate effort or propulsion. It was as if someone had grabbed it from above with an invisible string and pulled straight up at a constant rate. I remember holding my breath without realizing it. The orb climbed higher, passing the height of the nearby trees, then rising above the horizon line until it became this faint pin of light. The whole time, it never sped up or slowed down. It was like it was following a preset path upward. When it reached a certain height, maybe several hundred feet, it simply vanished. Not popped out, not faded. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. Like someone flipped a switch. The sky looked normal again. Stars in their usual places. The field unchanged. As soon as it disappeared, the sounds of the night returned. Crickets started up again in a messy chorus. The wind brushed across the tops of the crops, and the distant thump of irrigation machinery buzzed faintly through the air. The world snapped back into itself so suddenly that I actually flinched. I got back in the car, shut the door, and just sat there. My hazard lights flashed on the road, reflecting off the ditch, and everything looked completely ordinary again. Too ordinary. Like nothing strange had happened at all. When I finally pulled back onto the highway, my hands were shaking a little on the wheel. I checked the rearview mirror more times than I want to admit, even though I knew I wouldn't see anything. A couple miles down, I realized the dashboard clock had jumped ahead. Not much. Just 3 minutes more than it should have been. I told myself it must have been off before, or maybe I'd misread it earlier, but the thought didn't sit right. When I got home, I walked straight inside without looking up at the sky again. It wasn't fear exactly, just a sense that I'd witnessed something I had no frame of reference for, and that the less I tried to explain it to myself in the moment, the better. The next evening, I drove the same route again before sunset, just to see if anything in the field looked different. It didn't. No scorch marks, no equipment, no towers, nothing that could suspend a light in the air. Just empty farmland stretching out in all directions, peaceful and unbothered. But when I stood at the edge of the ditch and looked out across the rows, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen something using the field for reasons I'd never understand, and that whatever it was, it hadn't cared one bit that I was there. I was fishing before dawn at Miller's Reservoir, the smaller one west of town where the locals go when they don't want company. It was late August, still warm during the day, but the early mornings had that damp cold that sticks to your sleeves. I'd gotten there around 4:45 a.m., hoping to catch some bass before the sun came up and ruined the quiet. There was no wind at all when I set up. The reservoir looked like dark glass, smooth enough that I could see the vague reflection of the tree line even in the low light. The only sounds were insects, the occasional splash far off, and the small clinks from my tackle box. Nothing unusual, nothing strange, just a calm, early morning on still water. I cast out and settled into my folding chair. My cousin Jacob was supposed to meet me later, but he always slept through alarms, so I figured I had a couple of hours alone. I didn't mind. Some mornings feel better without any talking. Maybe 20 minutes had passed when I saw the glow. It started faint. So faint I thought my eyes were adjusting weirdly. A pale blue tint appeared on the surface of the water, far out toward the center of the reservoir. Not bright, not shimmering, just a soft glow spreading over the dark surface in a small, perfectly round patch. I leaned forward, squinting. At first I figured it was my headlamp reflecting, so I clicked it off. The glow stayed exactly the same. The insects went quiet, all of them, like someone had hit mute on the whole shoreline. The blue patch brightened slightly. Not enough to light up the surroundings, but enough that I could see its edges clearly, crisp and circular. No ripple or distortion. It didn't look like anything underwater was moving. The surface remained perfectly undisturbed. It was like the light was hovering just above the water, except it wasn't casting reflection or glare. Then it started moving, a straight line. Slow, steady, perfectly level. The circular patch glided across the reservoir without widening or losing brightness. It didn't follow the curve of the waves because there were no waves. The surface stayed flat and smooth, almost unnaturally so. I stood up, not sure why. Reflex, maybe. My rod dipped to one side, forgotten. The glow kept traveling, cutting a line across the reservoir like it was on rails. No sound, no change in speed, no sign of anything below it. It passed by maybe 100 yards out, close enough that I could track its path clearly, far enough that I couldn't see beneath the surface. I remember thinking that if it were a boat, I would have heard the motor. If it were a flashlight from someone on shore, the beam would have been uneven or wobbly. And no flashlight I knew made a blue glow like that. Soft, smooth, uniform. As it drew closer to the western edge of the reservoir, the glow dimmed, but not like a light running out of power. It dimmed in segments, almost as if it were folding inward. The circle shrank just slightly, the edges contracting. Then it vanished. Not faded, vanished. 1 second it was there, gliding along, and the next second the water was completely dark again. The surface hadn't been disrupted at all. Not a ripple, not a burst of bubbles. Nothing. The insects resumed instantly, loud enough to make me flinch. A frog croaked from the reeds. A breeze brushed the back of my neck. Everything around me snapped back to normal, like reality was picking up from wherever it had paused. I realized I was gripping the handle of my fishing rod so tightly my knuckles hurt. I sat down again, but not because I felt calm. My legs were shaking a little, just enough for me to notice. I kept staring at the spot where the glow had passed, waiting for something else, another light, a ripple, anything. The reservoir looked like it always did before dawn. Still, dark, ordinary. After a few minutes, I reeled in my line just to have something to do with my hands. The line came back clean. No weeds, no drag, nothing caught. I checked my watch. 5:07 a.m. That didn't sit right. It felt like I'd been watching the glow for several minutes, but the time hadn't jumped the way it sometimes does when you zone out. It was as if those moments hadn't taken any time at all. I cast again, mostly to reassure myself that the water was still water, that the reservoir was behaving like a reservoir should. My lure hit the surface with a small splash, and that tiny disturbance felt more grounding than anything else that morning. Jacob showed up around 5:40. His headlights cut across the dirt lot, flashing behind me. I didn't mention the glow. Not because I decided to keep it secret, but because I genuinely didn't know how to start explaining it. What would I even say? Hey, something lit up the reservoir without touching it. He asked why I was standing instead of sitting. I told him my back felt stiff. The sun started rising soon after he set up his gear. The morning light hit the water and everything looked normal. Ducks swooping in for a landing, fish occasionally splashing near the reeds like the same old reflection of trees rippling with the slight breeze. But when the sunlight reached the center of the reservoir, something caught my eye. A faint shimmer, just for a second, like the surface there was slightly smoother than the rest. Not reflective exactly, more like the water had been reset to factory settings and hadn't quite blended with the rest of the reservoir yet. It disappeared as quickly as it appeared. Jacob didn't notice. He was busy complaining about knotting his line. We fished for another 2 hours. I tried to focus on the normal morning sounds, the bite of the air, the familiar rhythm of casting and reeling. But every so often, involuntarily, I'd look back toward the center of the reservoir. Nothing happened. No glow, no movement, no sign anything had passed through. On the drive home, with my gear rattling in the back of the truck, the silence finally caught up to me. I realized that what had unsettled me most wasn't the glow itself. It was how the water hadn't reacted to it. How something could move across a still reservoir, bright enough to change the darkness, without leaving so much as a ripple. As if the water hadn't even known it was there. I first found out something had happened because my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the backyard camera at 3:14 a.m. I didn't hear it then. I sleep with my phone on silent. But when I checked it in the morning, the notification time stood out right away. I usually don't get alerts at night unless a raccoon wanders to the shed. The thumbnail on the alert looked weird. It wasn't a shape or a person or even an animal. It was just bright. A washed-out frame with this faint, hazy glow that didn't match anything I recognized from my yard. I figured it was a glitch, maybe condensation on the lens or the IR sensor, catching something reflective. Still, it bothered me enough that I decided to look at the full clip before work. When I opened the footage, the first few seconds were normal. The yard looked the way it always did at night, dark but calm. The motion sensor light near the gate was off. The shed was just a shadow, and the trees behind the fence were barely visible in the distance. No wind, no movement. Then the glow appeared. It wasn't fast. It was like someone slowly sliding a sheet of pale light across the yard from right to left. Not bright enough to cast shadows, but enough to soften the dark edges of everything. It didn't flicker or pulse. It was steady and smooth. The same level of brightness all the way through. And it wasn't coming from the street behind my house. There were no headlights, and my fence is tall enough to block out most car lights anyway. As the glow moved, the camera's night vision flickered like it was struggling to process something. The image sharpened, then blurred, then sharpened again. The timestamp froze at 3:14 and then skipped ahead, 10 seconds. A jump from 3:14:2 to 3:14:12. No cut, no frame stutter. Just a clean jump as if those 10 seconds never recorded at all. The glow was gone after the skip, like it had never passed through. The yard returned to its usual grainy darkness. A few leaves rustled at the far left edge of the frame, something small, probably just a field mouse. But that was it. No lingering brightness, no visible object causing the wash of light. The clip ended a few seconds later. I replayed it 2 more times, slowing it down to see if maybe I'd missed something. But the light didn't come from any direction I could identify. It didn't get brighter or weaker as it crossed the frame. It looked like illumination without any source, just drifting over the yard like fog that glowed on its own. The timestamp skip bothered me more than the light. The camera had never done that before. Even during storms or when the Wi-Fi hiccuped, it never removed a chunk of time. It always showed something, pixel distortion, frozen frames, something, but this was a clean, sharp jump. Before work, I went outside to see if anything looked disturbed. The grass was still wet with dew. No burn marks, no footprints, not even the usual scuffs from the neighborhood cat. The shed door was closed. The gate was locked. Everything was exactly how I'd left it. But the air felt slightly different. Not colder, just heavier, like right before a thunderstorm, even though the sky was perfectly clear. I checked the camera itself. The lens was dry, no fogging, no scratches. The housing wasn't warm or malfunctioning. It looked completely normal. Work was a distraction for a few hours, but the moment I got home, I went straight back to the yard. I opened the gate and walked around the perimeter, slow and careful, waiting for something to feel out of place. Nothing did. Even the birds sounded normal, hopping around near the fence line, pecking at whatever bugs survived the night. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone again and watched the clip from start to finish. Same result. Same soft glow washing across the yard like a quiet wave of light. Same 10-second jump. That night, I left the blinds open in the living room so I could see into the backyard. I told myself it was just caution, but the truth was, I wanted to catch even a hint of that glow again. Just to see it with my own eyes, to confirm it wasn't a camera artifact. I stayed awake until after midnight, reading, occasionally glancing out the window. Nothing happened. The yard stayed dark and still. Around 1, I finally fell asleep on the couch. At 3:50 a.m., I woke up suddenly. No sound woke me, just the immediate awareness that something felt off. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even the fridge wasn't humming. I sat up and looked outside. The yard looked normal, no glow, no movement, just ordinary night. My phone buzzed a second later. Motion detected, backyard camera, 3:50 a.m. My stomach dropped. I opened the clip right away. Nothing obvious at first, just the normal grainy night vision look. Then I saw it, a faint shift of brightness at the far edge of the yard. Not the same wash of light as before, but something smaller. A soft, rounded glow tucked behind the tree by the fence. It didn't move much, just hovered near the branches like it was waiting. The timestamp didn't skip this time, but it stuttered. The numbers hesitated. 3:58, 3:50:09. The image warped slightly, like heat rising off asphalt. Then the glow dimmed, shrank into nothing, and vanished. The yard went still again. I kept watching the spot long after the clip ended, but nothing else appeared. By dawn, I'd convinced myself to check behind the fence, even though I had no good reason to be out there. The neighboring property is an empty lot with tall, wild grass and an old utility pole. I walked the whole perimeter, expecting to find a drone or maybe some weird reflective debris. There was nothing. Just dew, grass, and old trash the wind had carried from who knows where. The ground had no burn marks or footprints. Even the air smelled normal. Dirt, grass, a hint of something sweet from the flowering weeds. I went back inside and checked the camera one more time. I don't know why I expected anything else. The clip was exactly the same. The glow lingered in the corner for 8 seconds, then disappeared. That was 3 weeks ago. The camera hasn't caught another light since then, but every morning I still check. I don't let myself sleep through the night anymore. I wake up around 3 automatically, just to listen, just to look out the window and make sure the yard still looks like a yard. Nothing unusual has happened since, but the camera never explained why it skipped those 10 seconds, and I still don't understand what kind of light can brighten a yard without revealing where it comes from. I was camping alone near Alder Creek, a spot I'd visited a dozen times without anything strange ever happening. It wasn't a real campground, just a flat patch of dirt near the tree line where a lot of locals set up when they want quiet. I'd gotten there late in the afternoon, set up my small tent, made a fire, and cooked a simple dinner. Nothing unusual. The weather was clear, cool, and the woods felt calm in that way they do right before fall hits. By the time it got dark, I was settled in my camp chair listening to the forest. Crickets, katydids, a few owls calling from deeper in. The kind of nighttime noise that blends together into a steady backdrop. I wasn't expecting anything except maybe a raccoon sniffing around my cooler. I was just starting to think about turning in when the woods went silent. And I don't mean it got a little quieter. I mean every sound stopped at the exact same moment. The crickets, the frogs by the creek, the wind brushing through the leaves. It all cut out instantly, like someone had shut off a recording. I sat up straighter without even thinking. The silence felt too thick, like the air itself had changed. I remember holding my breath for a second because I didn't want to make noise either. My first thought was a predator, maybe a mountain lion nearby. But I didn't hear footsteps or rustling or anything that suggested movement. I listened harder. Silence. Total, complete silence. Then a soft red glow appeared behind the trees. It wasn't bright or sharp. It looked like someone was holding a dim lantern 20 or 30 yards behind the trunks, but I knew there was no path back there. The light had no defined edges, just a slow, pulsing halo that painted the silhouettes of the trees with a faint red tint. I didn't move at first. I just stared, trying to process it. The glow didn't flicker the way firelight would, and it didn't shift like someone walking with a flashlight. It stayed in one place, very still, but it felt too round, too uniform, to be any light source I recognized. It brightened slightly, not enough to illuminate the ground, but enough that the tree trunks nearest to it were outlined more clearly. The forest looked flat and strange in that light, like everything had lost its depth. My heartbeat picked up. I kept telling myself it had to be a person, some hunter walking around with gear I'd never heard of. But the glow wasn't moving like a person would. And no one camps in that area without making some noise. I would have heard footsteps or branches snapping. I reached slowly for my headlamp, trying not to make any sound. The zipper on my jacket pocket felt impossibly loud, even though I only moved it a millimeter at a time. The red glow held steady. Then, very slowly, almost too slowly to notice, it began to fade. Not in pulses, not in flickers. It just softened, like someone was lowering a dimmer switch in increments. The trees behind it, which had been silhouettes, gradually blended back into darkness. The glow shrank inward, tightening into a smaller circle. I stood up carefully, not sure why. My legs felt tense, like they were ready to run, even though I didn't know which direction was safe. As the red glow kept fading, the silence held. No insects, no creak sounds, no wind. It felt like the entire forest was waiting for something. The glow dimmed further. Now it looked like a single red ember floating behind the trees. Then it shrank again, no brighter than the light on a dying cell phone screen. Then it went out. Not abruptly, just a soft extinguishing, as if someone had gently blown on it. And the moment it disappeared, the insects returned. Not gradually. All at once. Crickets erupted, frogs croaked, leaves rustled with a light breeze that hadn't existed a second before. The shift was so sudden, I almost stumbled backward. It was like the forest had taken one long breath and finally exhaled. I turned on my headlamp and pointed it toward the trees. The light beam caught branches and low brush, but nothing else. No animals, no people, no reflective surfaces. Just ordinary forest. I waited a few minutes, telling myself the silence and the glow had to be unrelated. Maybe the insects reacted to some temperature change. Maybe the glow was a trick of my eyes. But the longer I stood there, the less I believed any of that. Eventually, I sat back down by the fire, though I didn't feel relaxed anymore. I kept glancing over my shoulder toward the place where the red glow had been. The trees looked completely normal. Everything sounded normal. If someone had walked through camp right then, they would have thought I was being paranoid for no reason. Around midnight, I forced myself into the tent. I zipped it tight and lay there listening, waiting for the silence to return or the glow to creep back into view. Neither happened. Morning came normally. Birds made noise at sunrise, the creek was flowing, and nothing looked disturbed when I stepped outside. But the air still had that faint, metallic smell I sometimes get after lightning storms, except there hadn't been any storms. I walked behind the trees to the exact spot where the glow had appeared. Nothing was there. No footprints, no fire pit, no gear, no disturbed brush. The ground was undisturbed dirt and pine needles. I stood there longer than I meant to, just staring at the empty space. The forest around me hummed with normal daytime noise, but it felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Like the silence from the night before was still there beneath everything, waiting for another moment to rise. I packed my campsite quickly after that. I've been back to Alder Creek since, but I don't camp in that exact spot anymore. I'm not sure what I saw, and I'm not sure the forest there is ever truly quiet for natural reasons. And every time I hear the insects fall silent, even for a second, I feel that same tightening in my chest, waiting for a soft red glow to appear behind the trees again. I was driving home late from my sister's place in Fortuna, taking the back road through the redwoods because the main highway was closed for night construction. It was around 1:30 a.m., cold enough that the windshield kept fogging a little at the edges, and the whole forest was wrapped in this thick, low fog that felt heavier than usual. The kind that eats the beams of your headlights instead of reflecting them. I wasn't tired, exactly, but the quiet had a way of getting into my head. No other cars, no animals crossing, not even wind in the trees. Just my tires rolling over damp asphalt and the occasional drip of condensation hitting the roof. A couple miles before the ridge, I came around a bend and noticed lights ahead. Headlights. They looked suspended in the fog, two pale circles glowing maybe 3 or 4 feet above the ground. No glare, no lens flare, just two steady, faintly yellow lights, perfectly still in the distance. They didn't look bright enough to be from a modern car, and they didn't have that spread that headlights normally have. They were shaped right, but wrong in every other way. My first thought was that someone had pulled over on the shoulder. Maybe their engine died. Maybe they'd hit a deer. That stretch of road didn't have much room though, so it would have been a tight squeeze. I slowed down, eased my foot off the gas, and watched the lights through the fog. They didn't move. No shifting shadows, no sign of a vehicle's outline, no silhouettes, nothing. Just the two circles floating at a fixed height. Even as my own headlights approached, the pair ahead stayed unchanged. I rolled down the driver's side window a couple inches to listen. The cold air swept in. Still no sound, no idling engine, no crunch of someone stepping on gravel, nothing. As I got closer, something about the spacing of the lights started to bother me. They were too far apart to belong to a motorcycle, too narrow for most trucks, and too high to be ground-level reflectors. And they didn't cast light onto the road. It was like they weren't really projecting anything, just glowing. The fog shifted around them, thinning for a second as I eased around another bend. For a moment I expected to see the body of a car appear behind the lights, but there was no car. The lights hovered there for a fraction of a second longer, just long enough for my brain to register how impossible it was, before the fog thickened again and swallowed them. My chest tightened. I turned off my high beams to cut the reflection and tried to see more clearly. The road straightened, the fog thinned in patches, and slowly the shapes of trees emerged. But the lights were gone. Completely gone. No red taillights, no reflection off metal, nothing drifting through the fog as a remnant. It was like they'd never existed. I drove forward another 100 feet, scanning the shoulder. Nothing. No skid marks, no debris, no animals. The pavement was wet but undisturbed. If someone had pulled over, they would have left tracks in the muddy edge from the week's rain. I pulled over for a moment, heart pounding harder than it should have. I turned off the engine and listened. Silence. An uncomfortable, dense silence that made the fog feel even thicker. I leaned out the window and squinted down the road where the lights had been. The fog drifted in slow sheets, pale and shapeless. My interior clock said 1:47 a.m. I knew I hadn't spent more than a minute or two approaching the lights, but it still felt like the time was off somehow, like too much or too little had passed. After another moment, I turned the engine back on. The sound of it felt too loud, like it didn't belong in the quiet. I pulled slowly back onto the road, trying not to accelerate too quickly. For the next mile, I kept expecting the lights to reappear. Maybe behind me this time, maybe around another bend. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half afraid I'd see those two floating circles following at a steady distance. But the road stayed empty. When I finally reached the top of the ridge, the fog thinned out all at once. The sky opened above me, and the tree line became visible again. For a moment, everything felt normal, just a quiet night drive through the redwoods. But as I started descending the other side, something else caught my eye. A faint glow on the branches overhead, like reflected light, but not from my own headlights. My beams were pointed at the road. Whatever lit the treetops came from above the fog line. It drifted across the branches for maybe 2 seconds and disappeared, too fast for me to pinpoint. Too soft to identify, but the timing made my stomach drop. I made it home just before 2:30. I parked under the carport and sat there for a few minutes with the engine off, waiting for some feeling of normalcy to settle back in. Eventually I went inside, but I kept thinking about the spacing of the lights, the way they didn't illuminate anything around them, and the way they simply vanished when the fog shifted. The next morning, part of me wanted to drive the same route again just to see the empty road in daylight. But I didn't. I wasn't afraid of finding something. I was afraid of not finding anything at all, and of realizing that whatever those floating headlights belonged to hadn't needed a foggy night in the forest to be there. The humming started sometime after 2 a.m. I wasn't asleep yet. I'd been lying in bed scrolling on my phone trying to wind down after a long day at work. My house sits on a quiet cul-de-sac outside Dayton, the kind of place where the loudest noise at night is usually someone's AC unit kicking on. So, when the sound first reached me, I didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't loud. It was low and steady, almost like a deep electrical hum. But it had weight to it, like it wasn't just in the air, it was in my body. I felt it before I fully heard it, a faint vibration in my chest, like standing too close to a big transformer. Except there are no transformers near my house. I muted my phone and sat up. The sound didn't change. It didn't get louder or softer. It just hung there in the air above me, a steady physical vibration that made my ribs feel tight. I tried pinpointing where it was coming from. It didn't sound like it was inside the house. Not the fridge, not the water heater, not the HVAC. It felt above, as if the roof itself had a speaker pressed against it. The vibration deepened slightly. Not louder, just more solid. Like whatever was generating it had settled directly overhead. I swung my legs out of bed and stood there for a moment, listening. The hum stayed constant. I could feel it in the floorboards, but not evenly. It seemed strongest near my bedroom window. I walked over and peeked through the blinds. Nothing outside looked unusual. My driveway, the neighbors' houses, the street lamp at the end of the cul-de-sac, they were all the same. No car headlights, no wind rustling the trees, no animals moving around, just stillness. But the humming didn't match that stillness. It didn't match anything. I let the blinds fall back into place and grabbed a hoodie. For some reason, I felt anxious about opening the front door, like the sound was aware of me listening. I hesitated with my hand on the doorknob longer than I meant to. The hum continued. The second I stepped outside, everything stopped. The sound cut off so abruptly it made my ears ring. The absence of vibration felt jarring, like someone had pushed pause on the world. I stood there on my porch, staring up at the sky, expecting to see something. A plane, a drone, a weird weather balloon, anything. But the sky was just black, with a few stars peeking through light haze. No movement, no clouds, nothing out of place. I took a few steps into the yard, listening as hard as I could. Silence. Not even the usual nighttime insects. Not a single cricket. Not a single rustle from the big maple near the fence. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel natural. Too complete, too controlled. I looked toward the roofline, half expecting to see shadows or a strange reflection. Nothing. I walked around to the side of the house. Still nothing. The silence stayed thick and heavy, but the humming didn't come back. My chest felt weird, like the vibration was still echoing inside my ribs even though it was gone. After a minute or two, the crickets returned all at once. A normal night sound, except it made me jump because of how sudden it was. A breeze picked up, brushing against my sleeves. The world resumed, but the humming did not. I waited outside another 10 minutes, circling the house twice, scanning the sky over and over. Everything remained ordinary. Too ordinary. Eventually, I went back inside. The moment the door closed behind me, I froze. For a split second, just long enough for me to question it, I thought I felt the faintest vibration under my feet again. I held my breath. Nothing followed. I walked room to room, checking appliances, checking vents, checking anything that could hum. Everything was normal. Everything sounded right. I went back to my bedroom and sat at the edge of the bed. The house felt normal again, quiet, settled. I stayed awake until almost 4, waiting for the humming to return. It didn't. I finally lay down and drifted into a restless sleep. In the morning, I found something strange, though I don't know if it means anything. The motion-sensing porch light, the one I'd walked under when I stepped outside, hadn't turned on. Not when I opened the door. Not when I stood there for several minutes. Not when I walked into the yard. It worked fine when I tested it later. It flicked on instantly, bright enough to blind me for a second. But during the humming, or whatever that was, it never activated. That night, I tried to pretend the sound had just been some mechanical noise I couldn't identify. Maybe a low-flying plane. Maybe some weird resonance in the HVAC. But when the house settled after dark and the neighborhood got quiet again, I found myself listening for the vibration in my chest, waiting for that low, impossible hum to come back. It hasn't returned. Not yet, anyway. But sometimes when I'm lying in bed, I think I can almost feel the faintest pressure above me, like something hovering just out of hearing range, waiting for me to notice again. I woke up before my alarm, not because of any sound, but because something felt wrong in the room. It wasn't fear exactly, just a sharp awareness, like my brain had been nudged awake. My apartment was quiet. The heater wasn't running, no cars outside. Nothing out of place except one thing. My blinds were slightly parted, just a narrow gap, maybe 2 inches wide, enough to let a sliver of light fall across the wall. I stared at it for a few seconds, confused. I always close the blinds at night. Always. The street lamp outside is bright enough to bother me, and I'm one of those people who wakes up if the room isn't completely dark. I remembered shutting them before bed. I remembered reaching up, pulling the cord, and checking twice that the slats were fully closed. But now there was a gap, and through that gap, the sky looked bright. Too bright. Not sunrise bright. There wasn't any color. Just an oddly clear, even light, as if a giant softbox was hanging over the city. The sky was usually orange or pink at that hour, or still dark if it was earlier than I thought. But this wasn't like that. It was white, but not daylight white. More like a reflection on polished glass. I sat up slowly, feeling my heartbeat pick up in a way that didn't match the calm quiet of the room. My clock said 4:19 a.m. Sunrise wasn't until almost 6. I slid out of bed and approached the window. I didn't touch the blinds at first. I just looked through the narrow opening. The sky was cloudless, completely empty, but it glowed with that strange, high, diffused brightness. No stars, no moon, no color, just a bright, featureless dome over everything. It lit the tops of buildings faintly, but the ground remained dark, like the light wasn't actually reaching anything below a certain height. My breath fogged in the sliver of cool air leaking through the window frame. I hadn't opened the window the night before. I checked the lock. It was still latched. The blinds shouldn't have moved on their own. I pulled them open another inch. The brightness didn't change. The sky still looked artificial somehow, like it wasn't really the sky at all, but something pressed right up against it. The longer I stared, the more wrong it felt. Not threatening, just wrong in a way brain struggled to categorize. I heard a faint buzz, almost like static, coming from somewhere outside. It wasn't loud, more like the background hum of a refrigerator, but higher pitched. It came and went in uneven waves. Not quite a sound, not quite a vibration. I shut the blinds fully, suddenly overwhelmed with the urge to block the sky out. The room dimmed again, and I felt a small wave of relief just not looking at it anymore. But curiosity pushed me back after a minute or two. I opened the blinds all the way. The sky had dimmed, only slightly, but enough that the brightness wasn't as stark. A faint gray tint had settled across it, almost like a thin layer of fog was forming, even though the clarity of the buildings hadn't changed. The static buzz sound faded in and out, like it was trying to tune itself to a signal. I pressed my forehead lightly to the glass and looked upward. Nothing moved. No aircraft. No wind. No flickers of light or shadow. Just that huge blank brightness, slowly fading toward normal pre-dawn gloom. A sudden thought hit me hard and cold. What if the blinds hadn't just been nudged? They'd been opened so something could look in. I stepped back from the window quickly, pulse spiking. I checked the apartment door. Locked. Deadbolt secure. Chain still attached. I checked the sliding door to the balcony. Also locked. No footprints. No displaced dust. Nothing to suggest someone had been inside. I returned to the bedroom window, gripping the edge of the sill. The sky had dimmed further now, blending into a more familiar early morning gray. The brightness was almost gone. The static buzz had become inconsistent, short bursts separated by long stretches of silence. At 4:27 a.m., the last of the brightness faded. The sky turned completely normal, as if someone had switched it back to its original setting. Stars didn't reappear, but the usual dark blue pre-sunrise tone settled over everything. I checked the clock again. Only 8 minutes had passed. It felt longer, not by much, just enough to make me question whether I'd zoned out or lost track. The blinds, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't just slipped. The slats were stiff. They didn't move without a decent amount of pressure, and that small opening, 2 inches wide, was too precise to be an accident. My first thought was an earthquake tremor, but we hadn't had one, and even if we had, the blinds would have rattled, not shifted sideways. I spent the rest of the night awake, sitting in the living room with a blanket wrapped around me, checking the window every few minutes. Nothing unusual happened. The sky slowly brightened the way it always did. Cars drove by. Someone walked their dog around 6. By 8 a.m., it felt like the kind of weird thing you talk yourself out of believing. A trick of the light, maybe. A weather event I didn't know about. Something. But when I finally went back into the bedroom to make the bed, I noticed something I hadn't seen earlier. The cords of the blinds, normally resting straight down, were twisted. Not tangled. Twisted as if someone had wrapped their fingers around them and rotated. There was no breeze inside. No pets. No reason they should have been like that. I untwisted them slowly, trying not to think about it too much. That night I closed the blinds again, double-checked the latch, and even put a small piece of tape on the edge to see if it would move. I didn't sleep well. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to total darkness. No glow, no static, nothing unusual, except the tape lay on the floor, and the blinds were parted by 2 inches. I was driving back from Reading after visiting my friend Nate, taking Highway 299 toward Weaverville. It was close to midnight, the kind of late where the road feels separate from the rest of the world. No traffic in either direction, no houses for long stretches, and just enough moonlight to outline the tops of the pines. The air was cold and dry, the sky unusually clear for that time of year. I wasn't tired, just bored, letting some quiet AM talk station fill the silence. The road curved gently left and right, nothing sharp, and I kept a steady speed. It was one of those drives where you start thinking about random stuff because there's nothing else to grab your attention. Then something caught my eye, barely noticeable at first. A glint, a reflection. High above the road, maybe 50 or 60 feet up. My headlights bounced off something metallic for just a second, like the way light hits a moving road sign at the wrong angle. I slowed a little and leaned forward, trying to figure out what I'd seen. There were no signs there, no overpasses, nothing hanging above the highway. Just open air and the dark silhouette of trees. I kept driving but stayed alert. A few seconds later, the reflection appeared again, this time more definite. A smooth, curved surface. Not big, but not small either, maybe the size of a compact car. It hovered above the right side of the road, high enough that I had to crane my neck to keep track of it through the windshield. My foot eased off the gas without me thinking about it. The thing didn't move like anything I recognized. It didn't bob or sway or drift. It stayed perfectly still, suspended in open air, catching the edge of my headlights in a soft, quick flare. I slowed to almost 40, watching it from the corner of my eye. It wasn't a drone. There were no lights on it, no blinking indicators, no noise, nothing mechanical at all. The only reason I knew it was there was because of those faint reflections when my headlights hit its surface at just the right angle. The object tilted. Not much, just a slight shift, like it was turning to look down the road. The reflection slid across its underside and vanished as if it had turned away from the beam. I hit the brakes harder than I meant to, and the car jerked slightly. My heart started pounding. I rolled down the window, expecting to hear something. Wind, a mechanical hum, anything. But the night was dead silent. I looked back up. The thing shot upward. No sound, no trail, no acceleration curve. Just an instantaneous upward movement, like something had yanked it straight up out of sight. One moment it was there, hovering above the pines. The next, it was just gone, swallowed by the darkness. I sat there in the middle of the highway with my hazard lights blinking, trying to process what I'd seen. The hairs on my arms were standing straight up. My breathing felt too loud inside the car. After maybe a minute, I pulled over onto the shoulder and stepped out. The air felt colder than before, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the seconds after the object vanished. I looked straight up and saw nothing. No clouds, no stars blocked out, just open sky. But something else unsettled me. The pines around the road weren't moving. Not even a hint of wind. Everything felt unnaturally still, like the world was holding its breath. I walked out a few feet from the car, looking up the entire time, half expecting the metallic shape to drift back into view. My ears rang slightly, though I couldn't tell if that was from the sudden quiet or my own pulse hammering in my head. I almost turned back to the car when I noticed something odd near the tree line. A faint shimmer, like heat distortion. Even though the air was cold, it lasted only a couple seconds, warping the outline of the branches, and then it faded. The trees snapped back into clarity. I didn't see any movement in the forest, but the sense of being watched, being observed from above, hit me so suddenly that I froze. The whole area felt open in a way it hadn't before, like the sky itself had widened. I got back in the car and locked the doors, which felt ridiculous even as I did it. Whatever I'd seen wasn't going to be stopped by a door lock. But it made me feel a little less exposed. I continued driving, slower now, checking the mirrors constantly. Every time my headlights swept across a reflective road sign, my stomach jumped, thinking I'd see that metallic shape again. But nothing appeared. 10 minutes later, as I came down a long grade, I noticed the sky ahead flicker, just once. A thin vertical flash, almost like lightning trapped inside a cloud, except there were no clouds. Then, everything was dark again. My dashboard clock read 12:42 a.m. I looked at my phone just to compare. It said 12:38, 4 minutes off. The car clock had been accurate when I left Reading. I remember checking it. I remember thinking I should get home around 1:15, but now it was ahead, just by a few minutes, but enough that it made my hands tighten on the wheel. The rest of the drive home was uneventful. By the time I reached the outskirts of Weaverville, the sky looked normal, the trees moved in a light breeze, and I started convincing myself that maybe I had overreacted. Maybe the object hadn't actually been hovering. Maybe it was some weird reflection off a low-flying aircraft. But when I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, the metallic taste in my mouth, sharp and chemical, made those explanations feel flimsy. I hadn't noticed it until then, but it hit me as soon as the headlights shut off. I sat there a long time before going inside, trying to convince myself that everything was normal. But every time I replayed the moment that thing tilted in the air, the feeling came back. The sense that it wasn't just moving, it was reacting. The power went out sometime after 11. I was home alone in my rental outside of Bend, sitting on the couch with a mug of tea and half watching some old documentary when everything just clicked off. Lights, TV, heater, all of it. The house fell into that thick kind of darkness you only get in rural neighborhoods, where there aren't many streetlights to fill in the gaps. I waited a few seconds, assuming it'd flick back on, but nothing happened. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked outside. The houses across the road were dark too. Even the traffic light at the intersection a block away was dead. No hum of appliances, no glow from windows, just complete silence except for distant wind. The sky was cloudy, but I could still make out the outline of the treetops. Everything had this strange, muted feel, like the night was thicker than usual. I grabbed my phone, but my service indicator was down to one flickering bar. Data wouldn't load. I checked the power company's outage map, but the page kept timing out. I decided to step outside for some air and see if any neighbors were out too. Sometimes people gather on porches during outages, even if they don't talk to each other. It's that weird instinct to take stock together. But the street was empty. No car headlights approaching. No dogs barking. Nothing moving. I leaned against the railing and looked up. That's when I saw it. A patch of clouds almost directly overhead had this faint blue glow behind them. Not lightning blue and not bright, more like the gentle backlight of a monitor. It didn't pulse or flicker, it just held steady, lighting up that one section of sky. It wasn't spreading. It wasn't fading in or out. It was too controlled, too contained. At first, I thought maybe a transformer had blown somewhere near the edge of town, and the light was bouncing off the cloud layer. But transformers flash bright and fast. This was soft, sustained, calm, in a way that didn't match anything natural. It was maybe the size of 2 football fields, this perfect bluish halo diffusing through the clouds. The edges were clean, not sharp but intentional, like a light shining through frosted glass. I stepped further into the yard, craning my neck, trying to find a source. But the glow was coming from above the clouds, not beneath them. If something was underneath, I should have seen silhouettes or beams or at least some structure. But there was nothing. Just a bright patch in an otherwise dark sky. I don't know how long I stared. It could have been 30 seconds or 5 minutes. It felt suspended, like time wasn't moving quite right. The air was cold enough to sting my nose, but I barely registered it. Something shifted, not the light, not the clouds. just the atmosphere around me, like the air pressure dipped. My ears popped slightly, and the hair on my arms rose under my jacket. The clouds around the glow started drifting faster, even though the trees weren't moving. They slid across the sky in this smooth horizontal glide, too gentle to be pushed by wind, more like they were making space. The glow brightened just a touch, barely noticeable, but clear enough that I took a step back without meaning to. Then the sound started. Not a real sound, more like the hint of one. A faint vibration, as if a tone was being played at a frequency just outside what I could fully hear. It settled in my chest more than my ears, a subtle resonance that came and went in soft waves. I felt suddenly exposed standing there in the open yard. That's when the glow started to fade. Not quickly and not unevenly. It dimmed with this strange precision, like someone was turning down a dial. The blue softened to gray, then to nothing, leaving just the normal cloud cover behind. The instant the glow disappeared, the entire neighborhood clicked back to life. Street lights, porch lights, the low hum of electricity coming back online. The timing wasn't just close, it was exact. The moment the last trace of the glow vanished, the power returned. The porch light above me buzzed and snapped on, washing the yard in a warm yellow that made everything feel suddenly artificial. I blinked against it and backed up onto the steps. Inside, my appliances were rebooting, the heater kicking on, the Wi-Fi router blinking its sequence. My phone buzzed with missed notifications that had failed to send earlier. But something small and strange caught my eye. The stovetop clock, which always reset to 12 after outages, was now flashing 1:18. My phone said 1:12, 6 minutes off. It wasn't much, but it bothered me, especially because I couldn't account for those 6 minutes. I hadn't been outside that long. I tried to chalk it up to the power company's internal timing resetting weirdly, but later when I checked the microwave and the coffee maker, both showed 1:18 too. Everything in the kitchen agreed on a time that didn't match any other clock in the house. I stayed up another hour, pacing, checking outside through the blinds every few minutes. Nothing unusual. The sky was just a normal moonlit gray. No blue, no glow, no vibration in the air. By the time I finally went to bed, I had convinced myself it was some electrical phenomenon mixed with a weird weather reflection. Something explainable. Something boring, except that when I lay down, the room felt too quiet. Not peaceful. Just expectant. Like the air was listening. I pulled the blankets up, closed my eyes, and tried not to imagine that blue glow returning behind the clouds, or the idea that maybe it hadn't caused the outage at all. Maybe it had been waiting for one. I was sitting in the backyard after dinner, letting my dog wander around while I scrolled through my phone. It was early September in northern Vermont, the kind of cool, crisp night where the air feels clean and every sound carries. The sky was mostly cloudy, but with gaps here and there, and the moonlight kept slipping through in patches. Nothing unusual about the evening at all. Then the pressure in my ears changed. It hit fast, one of those sharp pops followed by a muted, underwater feeling. Not painful, just sudden and wrong. I swallowed, trying to clear it, but the feeling didn't go away. It was like I'd been dropped onto a plane mid-descent. Even the air around me felt heavier. My dog, Milo, froze mid-sniff and lifted his head. He wasn't growling or barking, just locked in place, staring upward like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. I lowered my phone and looked up too. At first, I didn't see anything except the usual shifting clouds. A long stretch of them was drifting west, covering the moon. I almost sat back down, assuming the pressure change was weather-related or something with my sinuses. Then I saw it. A single point of light, faint and soft, drifting between the clouds. It wasn't bright enough to be a plane or a satellite, just a dim glow like a star seen through fog. But it moved, slowly, intentionally. It slipped from one patch of cloud to the next with this smooth trajectory that didn't match the wind direction or speed. I stood up without realizing I'd done it. The pressure in my ears got worse for a moment, a tight squeezing sensation that made me rub the sides of my head. Milo whined softly and backed closer to me, tail down. The light continued drifting. Not fast, not erratic, just a steady glide. Every time it passed behind a cloud, the cloud around it brightened slightly, but not enough to be a beam. More like the light had a faint aura that pushed a small glow through the surrounding vapor. I kept waiting for it to blink, flash, or show any sign of aircraft lighting patterns. But it never changed brightness, it never wavered, and there was no sound, not even distant engine noise. The entire backyard was unnervingly silent, even the crickets. The light paused. It didn't stop moving abruptly, it just slowed until it hovered in place, casually, like it was thinking. The pressure in the air shifted again, a low thrum, not a noise, more a physical sensation, spread through my chest. Not painful, not intense, just there, present in a way that made my heartbeat feel off rhythm. I stepped backward until I hit the porch railing. Milo pressed against my leg, trembling now, staring straight up with wide eyes. The point of light drifted slightly lower. Still silent, still dim, but closer. The shape didn't change, and there was no structure visible behind it. Just that light, floating in the gap between two cloud bands. I tried clearing my ears again, swallowing hard. For a moment, everything felt normal, and the pressure lifted. Then, almost immediately, it returned, stronger than before. The hairs on my neck rose. The light tilted. I don't know how else to describe it. It didn't rotate like an object. It tilted the way a person might lean to one side to get a better look at something. It shifted angle without moving position, and somehow the faint glow changed shape just enough that I knew it was facing me, or oriented toward me. My throat went dry. Milo let out a short, muffled bark, the kind dogs make when they're scared but don't want to provoke anything. The clouds around the light darkened for a moment, like they were absorbing the glow instead of reflecting it. The pressure surged enough that I felt slightly dizzy, and then the light moved again, smoother this time, like it had made up its mind. It drifted horizontally across the sky, speeding up just a little until it reached a thicker patch of cloud. As it disappeared behind it, the entire cloud pulsed faintly, a single pulse, dim, silent, like a heartbeat. I gripped the porch rail, trying to steady myself. Milo whined again and started pulling toward the door. I finally snapped out of whatever trance I'd slipped into and brought him inside. The instant the door closed, the ear-splitting pressure vanished. Just gone. My hearing returned to normal, the air felt lighter, and I realized I'd been clenching my jaw so hard it hurt. I flipped the porch light on and looked back through the window. The sky looked normal again. Clouds drifting lazily, no glow, no drifting point, no pressure changes, but something was off. It took me a minute to figure it out. The crickets hadn't come back yet. The yard was completely silent, the kind of silence where you can hear your own breathing too clearly. I sat on the couch with Milo and waited. Maybe 10 minutes passed before the normal nighttime sounds slowly returned, like someone turning up the volume on the world. I checked the time. My phone said 8:57 p.m. I could have sworn it was around 8:40 when I first sat outside. 17 minutes wasn't a huge difference, but it felt wrong. I replayed everything in my head, trying to account for each moment. There was no gap, nothing I'd zoned out through, but the numbers didn't add up. Before going to bed, I stepped onto the porch one more time. The air felt normal again. The sky was just a cloudy night sky. But the spot where the light had hovered seemed a little clearer than the rest, like the clouds there were thinner or had been pushed aside earlier. I closed the door quickly. I slept with the curtains drawn, something I almost never do. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly with no idea why. My ears felt normal, the house was quiet, and Milo was asleep at the foot of the bed. But when I glanced at the window, I saw something through the curtains. A faint glow. Not bright. Not blue. Just a tiny soft pinpoint of light positioned high above the tree line, barely visible through the fabric. Drifting. Slowly. I was hiking the North Shore Trail near Lake Superior, a route I'd done a few times before. It was early October, the air cold enough that my breath fogged every time I exhaled. The lake wind had been steady all morning, and the sky was that pale, washed-out blue you get before it decides whether to rain or clear up. I'd planned on doing about 6 miles before heading back to my cabin rental in Silver Bay. The trail was empty. Too cold for casual hikers, I guess. The only noises were the crunch of leaves under my boots and the distant rush of waves hitting rocks somewhere below the ridge. I was about 2 miles in when I saw the shimmer. At first, I thought it was sunlight catching on water or glass, but the light was muted that day, barely strong enough to make shadows. The shimmer hung in the air about 20 feet ahead of me, almost at eye level, stretching maybe 4 or 5 feet across. The weird part was the temperature. It was cold, around 40 degrees, and the shimmer looked exactly like heat rising off pavement in the middle of summer. That wavy, watery distortion you see above a grill or car hood when it's hot out, except there was no heat, no sun, no reason for anything in the air to look like that. I slowed down without deciding to. My boots snapped twigs and rustled leaves, and the shimmer reacted, or at least it seemed like it did. The wavy distortions tightened like the air inside was compressing. I stopped walking. The shimmer stayed where it was, hovering low between 2 birch trees. It didn't spread or drift or fade the way fog or mist would. It stayed tight, controlled, almost like it was holding a shape that I couldn't quite see. At first I thought maybe there was a thin sheet of ice hanging between the branches, catching some weird reflection. But when I leaned slightly to the left, the shimmer moved with my perspective, not like a solid object, but like a lens distortion. When I shifted right, it shifted too, just enough that I knew it wasn't something physical. It was in the air itself. My fingers felt colder, but the rest of me felt pressed in, like the air was thicker in that spot. My breathing changed, shallow without meaning to be. The wind dropped. Not fully, just enough that the constant rustling of leaves faded into nothing. The silence was immediate and strange. Even the lake sounded farther away. I considered turning around. I should have. But something about the shimmer held my attention in a way that felt almost magnetic. Not tempting, just hard to ignore. Like it needed to be understood before I moved again. A branch snapped behind me. I whipped around. Nothing there. Just the trail stretching back, quiet and empty. The trees didn't move. No birds flushed out of the branches, and it was the kind of sound that felt deliberate, not random. When I turned back, the shimmer had shifted. Not gone. Just moved a few feet to the right, drifting between the birches and hovering near a fallen log. It didn't move like something carried by wind. It slid sideways in one smooth motion, as if following a line only it could see. The pressure in my ears changed, a tiny pop, followed by that underwater muffled sensation I've only ever felt in elevation changes. The ridge wasn't high enough to cause that. I swallowed hard, but it didn't fully clear. The shimmer pulsed, a quick, subtle contraction of the distortions, almost like an inhale. I stepped back, just one step, but my heel caught on a rock, and I stumbled. The movement must have broken whatever stillness the thing was holding, because the shimmer wavered, flickered, and then dissolved. Not like fading. It unraveled, like someone pulled a thread out of a fabric and the whole pattern came apart. The air snapped back to normal. The wind returned. The birch leaves rustled overhead like nothing had happened. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space. My breath came out shaky. My hands felt numb even though they were in gloves. I told myself to keep walking, to finish the hike, to not make a big deal out of something that might have been some optical phenomenon I wasn't smart enough to understand. But a part of me felt watched even after the shimmer disappeared. I walked forward slowly, stopping exactly where the shimmer had first hovered. I held my hand out, feeling for... I don't know what. Warmth? Cold? Texture? Nothing. Just air. But when I stepped through the space, my ears popped again. A small, tight pop that felt completely wrong. I hurried down the trail after that, half walking, half jogging. Every time the wind shifted, I twisted around, expecting to see the shimmer following me. It never appeared again, but the pressure sensation lingered in my head for another mile before finally fading. When the trail opened up near a lookout point, a couple in hiking gear passed me coming from the opposite direction. They said hi. I muttered something back. But when they walked past, I caught something in the corner of my eye, a tiny distortion behind them. Not a full shimmer, just a brief ripple in the air that vanished the second I focused on it. I made it back to the cabin in record time. My hands were still shaking when I unlocked the door. I kept glancing out the windows for the rest of the afternoon, looking for anything, any movement, any flicker, any distortion. Nothing happened. Not until later that night, anyway. Around 9 p.m., I stepped onto the porch to smoke. The lake was silent, the trees still, the sky clear. I exhaled and watched the vapor drift off to the side. Then, for half a second, the air ahead of me rippled again, just a small patch near the tree line, like something adjusting its position. When I blinked, It was gone. But the pressure in my ears told me it hadn't moved far. I was parked at Eagle Crest Lookout just outside Flagstaff, the one off the old service road where people sometimes go to watch meteor showers. It was a cold, dry night in late November, the kind where the air has that brittle edge and even small sounds seem to travel too far. I'd driven up there after work to clear my head, not planning anything special, just needed a quiet place to sit for a while. I killed the engine, but kept the radio on low, some late-night talk show murmuring about highway closures. The sky was clear, except for a thin band of clouds along the western ridge. I reclined the seat, cracked the window an inch, and watched the stars. A couple cars had passed earlier on the main road, but by the time it hit 11:30, I was alone. The first strange thing was how suddenly the wind stopped. One moment the air moved lightly through the pines, and the next it was perfectly still. The silence didn't feel normal. It had that thick, padded quality, like the world had been muted. I sat up a little, listening. Then the car vibrated. Just once, not violently, not even aggressively, more like a soft, controlled thump from underneath, as if someone had shoved the frame with an open palm. The kind of vibration you'd get if a heavy object landed nearby, except nothing had landed. The ground was solid rock around the lookout. My hands froze on the steering wheel, even though the engine wasn't running. I glanced at the rearview mirror out of instinct. Nothing behind me but the empty pull-off and a stretch of trees. I turned the radio off and listened. Nothing. Not the wind, not insects, not distant traffic. Just that same oppressive quiet. I sat completely still, waiting to see if the vibration would happen again. Maybe 30 seconds passed, maybe less. Hard to tell. My sense of time felt slightly off, like everything was stretching. I remember exhaling slowly to steady myself. Then a faint light appeared on the horizon. Not a beam, not a flare, just a small, diffuse glow sliding horizontally across the tree line. It looked too low to be a plane and too steady to be a reflection. The best way to describe it is that it moved like someone dragging a flashlight behind a frosted window, except the window was the sky. The light didn't brighten or dim. It held the same soft intensity as it traveled, gliding in a straight, deliberate path. I leaned forward, squinting. There were no roads out that direction, no houses, no towers, nothing that would cast a light like that. The glow continued sliding for another few seconds, then paused, just a tiny hesitation, like it had stopped to consider something. The edges of the clouds around it brightened slightly, but not enough to spill real illumination. Then the light dipped downward, almost imperceptibly, and vanished. Not faded, vanished, like someone had switched it off. I waited for any kind of after effect, a sound, a second vibration, a gust of wind, but the silence stayed absolute. My heartbeat felt like the loudest thing in the car. I turned the key to accessory mode and checked the dashboard clock. 11:48 p.m. Something about that bothered me immediately, though I couldn't figure out why at first. I checked the time right when I parked. I remembered it being 11:32. 15 or 16 minutes shouldn't have felt strange, but it did. It felt wrong. The amount of time between the vibration and the light disappearing didn't match that number in my mind. I picked up my phone. 11:43. 5 minutes difference. That wasn't normal, not for my car clock, which had always matched my phone to the minute. I stared at the numbers longer than necessary, trying to force them to make sense. I couldn't shake the feeling that a few seconds had felt like minutes, or the opposite. Something had stretched or compressed, subtle enough that I only noticed when comparing clocks. I turned off the car completely and stepped outside with my hands shoved deep in my jacket pockets. The cold hit immediately. My breath formed quick white puffs that hung in place longer than they should have. The sky above the lookout was clear as ever. No light, no movement. Not even a plane crossing overhead. I walked slowly to the edge of the pull-off and looked toward the horizon where the light had vanished. The clouds there looked normal now. Thin, harmless, drifting lazily. I waited, half expecting the glow to reappear or something else to move behind the clouds. Nothing did. I was about to head back to the car when I noticed something odd. The air felt heavier a few feet from where I stood. Not colder, not warmer, just thick, like stepping into low humidity after being in dry air. My ears buzzed faintly, as if pressure had changed. I stepped back and the sensation faded. I stepped forward again and it returned. It was concentrated in a small patch of space, maybe 2 or 3 feet wide. No shimmer, no light, no visual distortion, just this subtle physical presence, like the air wasn't behaving quite the same. I backed away slowly until the buzzing in my ears eased. The wind returned all at once. A strong gust pushed through the overlook, rattling the branches and carrying a rush of pine scent. The sudden noise startled me more than the silence had. It felt like the world had remembered to turn itself back on. I got into the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. The dashboard clock now read 11:50. My phone still said 11:43. The mismatch made my stomach flip, but I forced myself not to stare at it. I pulled out of the lookout and drove toward town, keeping one eye on the sky. Every few miles, I checked the clocks again. They stayed out of sync until I passed the highway turnoff. 3 minutes later, they matched perfectly. When I got home, I didn't turn on any lights. I sat in the dark in my driveway for a while, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine and watching the empty stretch of road leading up toward the mountains. Nothing followed me. Nothing appeared. But sometimes, especially on clear nights, I think about the feeling right before the vibration. The strange quiet, the sudden stillness, the sense that the air around me was waiting. And I wonder if that faint light on the horizon wasn't moving across it at all. I wonder if it was passing behind something I simply couldn't see. My neighbor, Evan, caught me as I was getting into my car for work. It was early, barely past 7, and the sun was just starting to hit the tops of the houses. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept well. "Hey," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Weird question, but did anything happen at your place last night? I told him no, not that I knew of. I'd gone to bed around midnight and slept straight through. He nodded slowly. I figured, just there were these lights over your house around 2. Bright ones, not moving like a plane. I laughed at first, because it sounded like something he would say just to mess with me, but his expression didn't change. He wasn't joking. He kept glancing past me toward my roof like he expected something to still be there. "What kind of lights?" I asked. He shook his head. "Hard to explain. White, but not really bright. Kind of diffused and really low. I thought maybe you were using some kind of spotlight or had people over, but it didn't look like it came from inside your house." I told him I'd check my cameras later, and he walked off looking more unsettled than before. I tried to shrug it off on the way to work, but it lingered with me all morning. Not because he saw something. He was the kind of guy who swore he once saw a bobcat steal someone's flip-flop, but because of how he said it. Quiet. Uncertain. Not excited or dramatic. Almost embarrassed. When I got home, I went straight to the security system app on my phone. 4 cameras covering the front door, driveway, backyard, and the side gate. The feed record's on a loop unless there's motion. I scrolled back to the time frame he mentioned, 1:58 a.m. The front camera froze for half a second, flickered, and then jumped ahead. To 2:04 a.m., 6 minutes gone. No motion triggers, no recordings. The timestamp box showed the time, but the text was fractured. Half the numbers warped or smeared like they'd been dragged with a finger before the screen dried. I replayed it 3 times to make sure it wasn't my phone glitching. Same result each time. I checked the backyard camera next. At 1:59, the screen dimmed slightly for a single frame so brief I almost missed it. It wasn't a blackout, it wasn't the IR mode switching. Just a dip in brightness, like a shadow had passed too close. Then that one skipped too. 1:50 straight to 2:47. I checked the other cameras. Same pattern, brief flicker, corrupted timestamp, missing minutes. That's when the memory hit me. Around 2, I had rolled onto my back in bed and half woken because the room felt lighter somehow. Not bright, not illuminated, just lighter, like the darkness had thinned. I didn't open my eyes fully. I remember thinking it was a passing car or a cloud moving over the moon. But my bedroom doesn't face the road, and it had been cloudy all night. At the time, it felt like a dream fragment, one of those half-asleep reflexes you forget seconds after it happens. But now, reviewing the footage, it didn't feel random. I went outside to check the positions of the cameras, see if maybe a porch light or reflection had caused the flicker. The sky was clear and blue, nothing unusual. But when I walked into the backyard, the air felt hollow, Not colder, not hotter. Just empty in a way I can't explain, like sound carried differently. My footsteps didn't echo off the fence the way they usually did. I stood exactly where the backyard camera was aimed, trying to picture what could have caused that dimming. A branch swaying? No wind last night? A bird flying close? Birds don't fly at 2 a.m. in winter. I checked the ground next, even though I knew it was pointless. No scorch marks, no footprints in the dirt, nothing disturbed. When I went back inside, I pulled the footage onto my computer, frame by frame. The corrupted timestamp block was almost unreadable, but not completely. The numbers in the middle row looked warped and stretched. As I zoomed in, I realized something unsettling. The distortion wasn't random. It curved, not like static or data corruption. It bowed outward in a smooth arc, like the timestamp had been pulled towards something, some warped center before the video skipped. I closed the file and sat back in my chair. The house was quiet, too quiet for early evening. Usually I could hear cars or kids down the street, but it felt like everything outside was holding its breath. My phone buzzed suddenly, making me jump. It was a text from Evan. "Did you see anything? Lights were right above your roof, like hovering." I stared at the message, trying to decide how much to tell him. Eventually I wrote back, "Nothing on my cameras except a flicker. Glitch maybe." He replied almost instantly, "Didn't look like a glitch from here." I didn't answer. That night, I left the blinds half open so I could see the backyard from bed. I kept the window cracked, listening for anything unusual. Around 1:45 a.m., the wind picked up. Not strong, just a steady rustle. My fence creaked once. A late car drove by. Normal things. I stayed awake until past 3. No lights, no flicker, no missing time. But when I reviewed the footage the next morning, I noticed something I hadn't expected. None of the cameras recorded between 1:52 and 1:54. Only 2 minutes, but all 4 cameras skipped the exact same window. No flicker this time, no distortion, just absence. Like those minutes weren't supposed to be there. I was walking home from my friend Lucas's place a little after midnight, cutting through the residential streets behind the old middle school. It was one of those cold, late fall nights where the air feels metallic and the streetlights buzz louder than they should. The sky was mostly clear, just a thin veil of haze around the moon. Everything was quiet. Most houses dark. A couple porch lights on timers, no cars passing. I had my hands shoved in my jacket pockets and my head down against the wind when something subtle caught my attention. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't even something I saw directly. More like a shift in the atmosphere around me, just enough to make me slow down. My shadow stretched long on the sidewalk from a streetlight behind me, and as I took a step, I noticed it didn't quite match my movement. I stepped forward and felt my foot hit the ground. But the shadow's foot landed just a split second later. It lagged, only by a fraction of a second, but it was wrong. Enough that I actually stopped walking and turned around. The streetlight looked normal, bright, steady, flickering a little like it always did. There were no cars, no people, nothing else that could have cast a competing shadow. I turned forward again and took another 2 steps. Again, the shadow lagged. Barely, but definitely. The moment I stopped to stare at it, everything returned to normal. My shadow held still, behaving exactly like it should. Just a dark outline on the pavement. I told myself it was fatigue or my eyes adjusting weirdly. Long day, long walk, whatever. I picked up my pace. A few seconds later, the air changed. It wasn't temperature, though it did feel slightly colder. It was pressure. A subtle drop, enough to make my ears feel like they needed to pop. The wind died instantly, like someone had hit a mute button on the whole neighborhood. Even the leaves that had been tumbling down the street settled without rolling. I looked up. A pale glow, so faint I almost missed it, drifted across the sky overhead. Not a beam, not a spotlight, more like diffused light behind a thin layer of clouds. But the glow moved, smoothly, silently, too slow to be a meteor, too steady to be a plane. It passed over me like a dim wave. The street and houses around me brightened just a little, but there was no source, nothing visible in the sky except that vague brightness. And as it moved, my shadow stretched and distorted again. This time I saw it clearly. My own shadow stretched forward and then bent slightly as if cast from a different angle, one that didn't match the streetlight behind me. Then it snapped back into place as the glow continued drifting. I froze on the sidewalk. The glow faded almost instantly once it crossed over the rooftops. 1 second it was there, then it thinned out like mist until the sky went back to being ordinary. Moonlight, faint haze, nothing special. The pressure normalized at the same time. The wind picked up again, brushing leaves across the pavement. My ears popped. The world sounded right. Everything should have felt normal then, but my body didn't believe it. I stared at my shadow for a long time, waiting to see if it would move on its own or lag again. It didn't. It just lay there on the sidewalk like any normal shadow. I kept walking, cautious now, checking the ground every few steps. Every time I passed under a streetlight, I slowed to see how the shadow behaved. For the next block or so, everything stayed normal. But when I reached the intersection near Pineview Lane, the one with the motion-activated streetlight, I felt it again. Just a flicker of that same pressure shift. The light above me turned on, washing the asphalt in sharp white. My shadow appeared clear and crisp, and again, barely off. But off. It tilted slightly to the left even though the light was directly above me. A subtle lean, like there was a second light source casting its own faint outline. Then, the shadow straightened again as the pressure eased. I didn't stay under that streetlight. I moved fast through the next stretch, not quite running but close. Everything in me wanted to get out from under the open sky. When I turned onto my street, the houses looked normal. Porch lights, quiet windows, a dog barking 2 blocks away. Nothing unusual. But as I passed under the last streetlight before my driveway, a sound reached me. A single, soft hum. Not mechanical, not electrical. Just a faint resonance for half a second, like something passing overhead that wasn't quite physical. I looked up on instinct. The sky was empty, no glow, no clouds moving strangely. Nothing. But I felt watched, not from the houses but from above, like something was tracking the movement of the very air I displaced. I hurried to my front door, unlocked it with shaking hands, and stepped inside. The house felt normal, warm, familiar, safe. But when I closed the door and leaned against it, I realized my breathing was uneven. I checked the time, 12:13 a.m. I was surprised. It should have been closer to 12:06, based on where I'd been on the walk. I know that route well. I take it all the time. I shouldn't have lost 7 minutes, not at the pace I'd been going. I didn't feel like I'd lost any time either. Everything felt continuous, except for the strange, stretched out moments under the glow. I went to the window and peeked outside. The street was still. My shadow from the porch light lay flat and perfect on the concrete. Nothing lagged. Nothing bent. I stood there for a long time, waiting for something to change, for the pressure to shift again, or for the faint glow to pass overhead a second time. Nothing did. But I still walk faster when I'm alone at night now. And every once in a while, even in daylight, I catch my shadow out of the corner of my eye and feel the same cold jolt in my stomach, like it's remembering something I'm not supposed to understand. I was staying at a small rental cabin outside Pagosa Springs, the kind advertised as a quiet mountain retreat, which turned out to be true, mostly because there was nothing around for miles except trees and the occasional mule deer. I'd taken the trip to get out of my apartment for a week and catch up on sleep, but I hadn't adjusted to the altitude yet, so most nights I'd end up waking around 4 or 5 in the morning. That's what happened that day. Woke up around 5:10 a.m., not rested, just suddenly alert. The cabin was cold, the kind of cold that makes the air sting the inside of your nose. I got up, made coffee, and sat on the small porch with a blanket draped over my shoulders. The sun wouldn't be up for at least another half hour, but the sky was already starting to lighten at the edges. At least, that's what I thought at first. I was staring out across the tree line when something about the light hit me as wrong. There was a brightening in the sky, but it wasn't spreading horizontally like dawn usually does. The rest of the horizon was still dark blue. Even the clouds overhead were dim and colorless. The brightness was confined to one narrow vertical line, like someone had drawn a glowing column directly above the ridge. It stretched upward from the mountains and locked in place, perfectly straight, maybe the width of a house. I stood up without meaning to. The light wasn't intense, more like the soft glow behind thin curtains, but it stood out sharply against the dark sky around it. It reached much higher than any light I'd ever seen projected from the ground, hundreds of feet, maybe more. The weight held its shape, and bothered me. Natural light doesn't stay that contained. For a few seconds, I thought maybe it was a weird reflection or some atmospheric thing I didn't understand. But I couldn't trace it to any source. No towns in that direction, no highways, no aircraft noise, just silence and that vertical glow. I stepped to the edge of the porch, listening. Nothing, no wind, no birds, not even the faint hum of insects. Everything had gone completely still. The brightness started to intensify, not spread, just grow stronger. The trees below the glow picked up a soft outline, but the light didn't hit the ground in any kind of beam. It wasn't shining downward. It was hanging above, suspended in the sky like a slit in the darkness. And then it started retracting. Very slowly at first, like someone pulling up a shade. The bottom of the light lifted, rising straight upward. The column narrowed further as it moved, collapsing into itself. The top stayed anchored in place for a moment before it, too, slid upward, shrinking the entire thing into a thinner and thinner streak. My chest tightened as I watched it. I can't explain why. It wasn't threatening exactly, just unnatural in a way that made my body react before my mind could catch up. As the light withdrew, the area where it had been didn't go dark immediately. There was a faint afterglow, like residual illumination clinging to the sky, but even that faded quickly. And then it was gone. The moment it vanished, the silence broke. A single bird started calling from somewhere near the cabin, sharp, loud chirps that sounded almost like a warning. The breeze returned too, brushing past my face in a way that made me realize how still the air had been before. I checked my phone. It said 5:23 a.m. I remember being confused by that. The whole event felt like it had lasted maybe 20 seconds, but 13 minutes had passed since I'd stepped outside. I tried to justify it. Maybe I'd zoned out watching the horizon. Maybe the coffee hadn't kicked in. But the numbers didn't sit right with me. I went inside, grabbed my binoculars, and scanned the ridge. Everything looked normal. No fires, no vehicles, no aircraft. The clouds above the mountains drifted lazily, dim but warming with the earliest hint of sunrise. The sky looked exactly how it should look, right before dawn, except for one thing I didn't notice until I lowered the binoculars. A faint vertical band remained in my vision, like an afterimage. Not bright, not distracting, just a faint pale streak lingering dead center. I blinked several times before it disappeared. When I raised the binoculars again, the same afterimage returned. It wasn't in the sky. It was in my eyes. I stayed on the porch until the real sunrise spread across the mountains in the normal way. Broad, horizontal, familiar. The light warmed the cabin walls, and the world felt ordinary again. Cars began to move on the distant highway. Birds kept calling. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere down the slope. But the strangeness lingered in small ways. At breakfast, I noticed my coffee maker's clock had jumped ahead 8 minutes. My phone time hadn't changed. I checked the microwave, also 8 minutes ahead. The wall clock, battery-powered, was correct. I thought about the silence before the light, the stillness, the compressed feeling in the air. I didn't tell anyone about it when I checked out of the cabin 2 days later. It felt too vague, too easy to dismiss. Part of me wanted to forget it. But the next morning, when I was loading my car to head home, I glanced toward the ridge out of habit. For half a second, no more, I thought I saw the faintest pale line hovering above the trees. Not bright, not solid, just there, then gone again. I heard the footsteps around 12:40 a.m. It had been one of those long, restless nights where nothing felt comfortable, so I was lying awake in my bed in my little house outside Mapleton, listening to the baseboard heater click and the occasional car on the county road. The night was cold, mid-January, with snow piled against the fence, but the wind had totally died, and the house felt still in a way it rarely did. The first sound was faint. Just a soft thump directly above me. I figured it was snow sliding or maybe a branch dropping, but then another thump followed, a little farther toward the center of the roof. Then another, spaced like someone taking slow, heavy steps. 3 in total. I sat up immediately. My house was small enough that any noise on the roof carried through the beams, but these didn't sound like settling wood or shifting snow. They were deliberate, measured, something moving. Millie, my old terrier mix, lifted her head from the foot of the bed and stared at the ceiling with her ears pinned back. She didn't bark. She just listened, tense. I held my breath, waiting for more sounds. Nothing. Just silence, thick enough to feel in my chest. I slipped out of bed and walked softly to the window. The snow outside reflected the faint porch light, giving everything a dull glow, but nothing looked disturbed. The trees along the property line were still. No wind. No snow falling from branches. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass and waited. Nothing moved on the roof. No one could be up there. The snow had been too powdery all week. Anyone walking on it would leave a clear trail. I almost convinced myself it had been an animal, maybe a raccoon, when something else caught my attention. The sky looked uneven. Off to the northwest, above the tree line, the darkness had a faint, bright spot. Not bright like a street light or someone's yard lamp. More like the night sky had been rubbed with a lighter shade. A subtle, hazy patch, maybe the size of an outstretched palm at arm's length. I stepped back from the window and blinked a few times, thinking it was my eyes adjusting. But the brighter patch stayed. It wasn't moving either, just hanging there, dull but noticeable against the winter clouds. I glanced at my clock, 12:47 now, and went to the back door. I didn't want to go outside, but staying in the house made me feel trapped. I grabbed my boots and jacket and cracked the door open. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. Millie stood next to me, whining softly. I stepped onto the porch and shut the door behind me, tugging my jacket tight. The night was quiet in a way I'd never heard before. No engine sounds from far-off farms, no barking dogs. Even the usual hum of the power lines seemed muted. I looked up toward the bright patch. It didn't glow like a star behind the clouds. It was too diffused, almost like someone had shone a flashlight onto the underside of the sky. The brightness didn't pulse or shift, just stayed where it was, a fixed smudge against the dark. Then I heard another noise. Not on the roof this time, from above, but lower than the sky. A soft scraping sound like something dragging lightly against aluminum. It came from the direction of the bright spot, but didn't echo the way sound usually did in the cold. It felt close, too close. I turned slowly, scanning the top of the house, but the roof was invisible from where I stood. All I saw was the snow-covered yard and the trees at the edge of the property. The scraping sound stopped. My porch light flickered. Not out, just a quick dip in brightness. I froze. When the light steadied again, the bright patch in the sky dimmed slightly. Not enough to disappear, just enough that the contrast shifted. I tried to convince myself there was some logical explanation. Maybe the clouds were thinner in that spot. Maybe light from a distant town was bouncing strangely. But nothing made sense with the footsteps I'd heard. I stepped into the yard, boots crunching through the crusted snow. The air felt heavier the farther I got from the house. Millie scratched at the door behind me, whining louder now. I looked back up at the bright spot. It seemed lower. Not a lot, maybe a handful of feet in perspective, but enough that my stomach dropped. I stood perfectly still, watching. The brightness didn't flicker or pulse. It just continued to hang there. A single, motionless patch of lighter sky. Something shifted behind the trees at the edge of my property. Not a shape, just a suggestion of movement. A slight distortion, as if the air wavered. I held my breath, waiting for an animal to emerge, but nothing came out. The distortion faded as quickly as I'd noticed it. I backed toward the house. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I jumped, nearly slipping on the snow. I pulled it out with numb fingers and looked at the screen. No service. It shouldn't have said that. I always had at least 2 bars at home, even during storms. The porch light dimmed again. This time it stayed dim a full second before brightening back to normal. As the brightness returned, the faint light in the sky flickered, twice quick, and then faded. Not gradually, instantly. One moment it was there, a ghostly patch behind the clouds. The next it was gone, leaving only uniform darkness. The quiet around me intensified, then cracked as the wind picked up sharply, rattling the branches overhead. Millie barked once from inside, desperate for me to come back. I ran to the door, slipped inside, and locked it behind me. For the next few minutes, the house groaned softly as the wind hit, like normal winter nights. Millie followed me room to room as I checked the windows, but nothing looked unusual anymore. The sky was fully dark now, the clouds blending seamlessly. When I finally calmed down enough to sit on the couch, I replayed the footsteps in my head. They'd sounded too heavy for an animal, too spaced to be settling snow, too deliberate. I considered going outside again to look for tracks on the roof, but the idea made my skin crawl. I waited until morning instead, when the sun was up and everything felt safer. In daylight, I dragged a ladder from the shed and climbed up carefully. The roof was smooth, no footprints, no disturbed snow, no signs anything had been up there at all. But near the center of the roof, right where the second thump had sounded, the snow was different. Not melted exactly, but compressed, a shallow depression, almost perfectly oval, maybe a foot long, no other marks around it. I scraped it gently with my glove. The layer underneath wasn't icy or hardened. It felt like normal snow, just pressed evenly by something that hadn't left a tread or a shape. When I stepped down from the ladder, I looked out at the northwest sky. Normal clouds, normal winter haze. Nothing strange, but the memory of that brighter patch, the way it hung there, the scraping sound that followed, nagged at me in a way I couldn't shake. That night, Millie refused to sleep at the foot of the bed. She curled up against my side instead, facing the window. And even though I told myself I was being paranoid, I kept the blinds closed and the porch light on until morning. I woke up with a metallic taste in my mouth so strong it felt like I'd been chewing on an aluminum foil. At the same time, the faint smell of ozone hung in the air. Sharp, electric, out of place for a cold February morning in northern Idaho. I sat up slowly, trying to figure out if maybe my heater had shorted or something, but the house was quiet. No odd beeping, no burnt plastic smell, just that metallic bite on my tongue and the weirdly clean smell, like the moment after lightning strikes. I swung my legs out of bed and felt a chill that didn't belong. I kept my thermostat set to 68 overnight, but the room felt colder than that, almost like a window had been open for hours. I checked. Both were shut tight, locked the way I always left them. Even the curtains were exactly where I'd pulled them the night before. When I stepped into the living room, the air felt normal again. Warm enough. No ozone smell. I shrugged it off, grabbed a shirt, and walked to the kitchen to start coffee. That's when I noticed the sky. It was unbelievably clear. Not clear for winter, not the clouds burned off early. It looked like someone had wiped the atmosphere clean. The blue was too deep, too sharp around the edges. The trees behind my cabin stood out like they'd been inked onto the horizon. I could see mountains in the distance that I usually only noticed on perfect midsummer days. It didn't look real. I stepped out onto the porch in bare feet, wincing as the boards bit into my skin with cold. The air was crisp, but not painfully so. It smelled normal again, except for the faintest hint of something. Sterile, like a hospital hallway. I leaned against the railing, scanning the tree line for anything odd. The birds were quiet. Usually by 7 a.m. I heard at least a few chickadees or crows, even in winter. But the woods around me sat still and muted, like someone had turned the volume down. I told myself I was just noticing things because I'd woken up weird. Then I saw the patch in the snow. About 20 feet from my porch, near the edge of the yard, the snow looked disturbed. Not footprints, more like a shallow impression, a wide oval shape pressed into the surface. The frost on it had melted unevenly, leaving faint radiating streaks around the edges. My first thought was that a deer had bedded down there, but no deer I'd ever seen made a perfectly smooth depression like that. I stepped into my boots and walked toward it. Each step crunched loudly, too loudly. Sound carried in the strange morning air. When I reached the impression, I crouched beside it. The snow inside was slightly wet, but not slushy. The texture was wrong, too compacted, as if pressed evenly by something broad and smooth. No hoof marks, no drag marks, no melted patch from a fallen tree limb. As I touched the snow, the metallic taste in my mouth intensified, like it reacted to being near whatever had made the impression. I pulled my hand away fast. That's also when I realized I didn't remember going to bed the night before. Not clearly, anyway. I remembered brushing my teeth, cleaning the kitchen, scrolling on my phone, and then nothing. No memory of turning off the lights or climbing into bed. Just a blank spot that felt too subtle to notice until I looked for it. I stood there in the cold, staring at the impression. The sky felt like it was staring back. I heard a soft clicking sound behind me, a single tick like metal cooling. I spun around, expecting to see my porch railing contracting or maybe an icicle dropping. but nothing had moved. The only sound in the woods was my own breathing. I went inside, suddenly needing noise. I flipped on the radio. It crackled with static, then smoothed out into the morning farm report. Normal. Completely normal. Too normal, almost. I checked my phone next. 3 missed calls, all from my neighbor Henry, who lived about a quarter mile down the road. The timestamps were 3:14 a.m., 3:19 a.m., and 3:27 a.m. I hadn't heard a single ring. My call log showed no record of the phone ever waking up. No notifications, no battery dip. Just 3 missed calls sitting there like orphaned reminders. I called him back immediately. He answered on the first ring, voice shaky. "Did you see anything last night?" he asked. My mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "I don't know. Something woke me up. My house lights flickered and I thought I heard, I don't know, wind, humming, something. I saw your place from the window and tried calling, but the line wouldn't connect." "My phone never rang," I said. "I figured." He took a shaky breath. "Forget it. Probably nothing." But it didn't sound like nothing. We hung up, and I checked the power in my cabin. The clocks on my appliances all blinked, but showed matching times. 5:32 a.m., which didn't line up with the actual time. I hadn't lost power the night before, not that I'd noticed, so I had no idea why they'd reset. My bedside alarm clock, the one with battery backup, showed 5:32 too. Every device agreed on the same wrong time. I walked back to the porch and stared at the sky again. It remained perfectly clear, the kind of clarity that didn't feel natural in winter. As I watched, a faint shimmer appeared near the horizon. Not light, not movement, more like heat haze, except it was below freezing. The shimmer stretched upward for a moment, then thinned out and vanished. A gust of wind hit, cold and sudden, as if something massive had just moved out of the area and the pressure was evening out. The trees shuddered. Snow dust blew off the branches. The metallic taste faded with that gust. So did the ozone smell. After a few seconds, the birds finally started up. A single chirp at first, then a handful, then the usual forest chorus slowly returning. The world sounded real again. I stayed outside a while, watching the woods, half expecting to hear or see something else. But the sky remained still. The odd clarity softened as thin clouds drifted in from the west. By the time I finished my coffee, everything looked completely ordinary. Later that afternoon, Henry stopped by. He didn't say anything about the night until he was leaving. He stood on my porch, hand on the railing, eyes locked on the trees. "You ever wake up tasting metal?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. He nodded like he already knew. "Yeah, me too." Before he walked home, he added, almost reluctantly, "The sky looked wrong this morning." I didn't ask him what he meant. I didn't have to, because the impression in the snow was still there. And no matter how long I stared at it, I couldn't convince myself it came from anything natural. That night, I couldn't fall asleep. Not because I was scared, but because I kept waiting. Waiting for the taste of metal to return, for the smell of ozone, for that unnatural silence that didn't belong in a winter forest. Nothing happened. But around 2 a.m., the wind shifted suddenly, just once, rattling the cabin windows. And for a split second, the sky outside looked clearer than it should have. Clearer than it was possible for a February night to be. I was out walking my dog, Penny, a little after 9 p.m. We'd gotten a late start because I'd been on a video call with my sister, and by the time I remembered Penny hadn't gone out, she was pacing by the door. It was one of those early winter nights in Brookfield where the air smelled like wet leaves and the temperature hovered just above freezing. A low ceiling of clouds blocked most of the sky, but the moonlight still seeped through in a dull, hazy way. My street is quiet even during the day, but at night it feels almost hollow. A single row of old sodium streetlights lines the sidewalk, spaced far enough apart that each cone of yellow light barely touches the next. Penny didn't seem bothered by the cold. She trotted ahead of me on her leash, nose down, tail swishing. The first strange thing happened about a block from my house. As we approached the next streetlight, it flickered once, hard, like it was losing power, and then snapped off completely. That wasn't new. They'd been doing that for months. The city kept promising to replace them. I remember rolling my eyes and muttering something about the electric grid. But then the next streetlight turned off, and the one after that. Not flickering, not dimming, They shut off in sequence, each one going dark just before we reached it. Penny froze. Her nails scraped lightly on the pavement as she planted her feet and stared straight down the street. I tugged the leash gently, but she wouldn't move. Her ears were forward, rigid, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. "Come on," I whispered, even though nobody was around. My breath clouded in the air. The dark felt heavier than it should have, like someone had draped a heavy blanket over the block. I glanced behind me. The streetlights we'd already passed were still on, glowing normally. Only the ones ahead had gone dark. I tried again to coax Penny forward. She took a hesitant step, then another, but her body stayed low to the ground. She kept sniffing at nothing, as if the air itself had changed. We reached the next intersection, which was lit by a single lamp near an old oak tree. As soon as we crossed under it, it went out. The sound it made, a faint metallic click, echoed louder than it should have. That was when I noticed the clouds shifting above us, not in a wind-driven way, but in slow gliding motions, like something large was drifting behind them. The movement wasn't natural. Clouds don't slide sideways all at once. I stared up at them, instinctively tightening my grip on the leash. Penny whimpered, low in her throat. Then I saw the glow. A pale, diffuse light, almost the color of frost on glass, moved silently between the clouds. It wasn't bright enough to illuminate the street, but it made the edges of the clouds shimmer in a soft, eerie way. The light wasn't shaped like anything I recognized. No beam, no spotlight, no hint of a structure behind it. Just a drifting glow that looked like it shouldn't exist. My first thought was that maybe a helicopter was overhead, but there was no sound. Not even the distant hum you usually hear before or after one passes. The light also moved too smoothly, like it was underwater. I realized then that all the streetlights around me, every single one, had gone off. Not just the ones ahead. Even the ones behind had shut down while I wasn't paying attention. The entire block was dark except for the faint, washed-out shimmer of that glow above the clouds. I crouched beside Penny, trying to calm her, but she wasn't responding. She was staring straight up, body trembling, tail tucked so far between her legs I could barely see it. I'd never seen her like that. And then the air pressure changed. It wasn't a gust of wind. There was no movement of air. It was a feeling, like stepping into an elevator that starts going up before you notice. My ears prickled, then felt full, like they wanted to pop. Penny whined and pressed her head against my knee. The glow slowed, not stopped, just slowed, as if whoever or whatever was moving it had noticed us. For a second I thought about calling someone, my sister maybe, but the idea felt ridiculous. Even if I did, what would I say? That the streetlights were turning off in front of me? That something was sliding through the clouds like a giant quiet fish? Besides, my phone's screen wouldn't unlock. I tried tapping it, holding the button, even hitting it against my palm. Nothing happened. The screen stayed black, but not dead, more like it wasn't receiving input. I shoved it back into my pocket and stood, gripping Penny's leash with both hands. The glow shifted again, not closer, but wider somehow. The cloud edges thinned, revealing a vague circular shape of dim light that pulsed once, soft enough that I wondered if my eyes were just adjusting. Then everything stopped. The air pressure eased suddenly. The clouds stilled. Penny lifted her head and sniffed the air, shaky but calmer. The glow vanished behind the clouds, dissolving like it had never been there. A second passed, long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. Then the streetlights flicked back on. All of them. In the exact same order they'd gone off. One by one, stretching down the block like someone was flipping switches from a distance. Penny bolted toward home, nearly pulling me off my feet. I didn't stop her. I jogged behind, my steps slapping against the pavement louder than usual in the newly returned light. By the time we reached my street, everything looked normal again. Cars parked the same way, houses dark except for a few bedroom windows, no sign that anything had happened. Penny ran straight to the front door and pawed at it until I fumbled the key and let her inside. I locked the door automatically, even though I never usually locked it until I went to bed. Penny hid behind the couch, something she hadn't done since she was a puppy. I checked my phone again. The screen lit up immediately. The time read 9:24 p.m. It had felt much longer than that. The next morning, I walked the same route just to reassure myself. All the streetlights were functioning. No flickers, no strange hums, nothing unusual about the sky. But when I passed the intersection where the glow had been overhead, Penny stopped again. She didn't growl or bark. She just stared up quietly, her ears pulled back in a tense, uncertain way. I followed her gaze. The clouds were normal. The sky was pale blue. There was nothing out of place. But I still felt that same pressure in my ears, just for a second, like an echo of the night before. I hurried home. Penny didn't need coaxing. I still walk her at night, but never that route. And whenever I see even the faintest flicker from a streetlight, I feel myself tense up, waiting for the rest to go dark in sequence, waiting for that pale glow to drift behind the clouds again. So far, it hasn't. I was standing in my backyard a little after 9, mostly just killing time while my dog Luna sniffed every patch of grass like she'd never been outside before. It had rained earlier, one of those short evening showers that leaves everything damp but doesn't cool anything off. The air smelled muddy and warm. Clouds were moving fast overhead, thin, patchy ones catching bits of moonlight in different places. Nothing felt strange at first. It was just another humid night in a small neighborhood outside Canaville. Quiet except for the usual bugs, a distant AC unit, and the occasional car passing the main road. Then my ears popped. Not both at once, just the left one first, then the right, like someone pressing lightly on the sides of my head. It wasn't painful, just sharp and sudden enough to make me stop walking. I swallowed, trying to equalize them the way you do on an airplane, but the pressure didn't settle immediately. It clung there for a few seconds, buzzing faintly behind the eardrum. I looked around without knowing why. It wasn't instinct exactly, more like the atmosphere around me had shifted in a way my body reacted to before my brain could catch up. Luna froze too, halfway through lifting her leg on the cherry tree. Her ears went rigid. The cricket stopped. Not gradually, just stopped. That's when I noticed the light. It wasn't bright. If anything, it was weaker than a star, but bigger. A little sphere of pale white drifting between the clouds, moving at a slow, steady pace. At first, I thought it was a plane caught behind the wispy layers, but there was no blink, no red or green navigation light, no sound. It made no sense how quiet it was. Normally, when it's that still out, you can hear a jet miles away. This thing was silent. Luna whimpered, low and uncertain, and stayed glued to my leg. She almost never does that. She's usually too focused on marking the entire property as hers. The light slid out from behind one cloud and into a clear patch. That's when I realized it wasn't as far away as I first assumed. The size was wrong. Too big to be a star, too defined to be a planet, too small to be anything I'd expect to see that low in the sky. It looked like it was maybe a few hundred feet up. Hard to tell, but it wasn't space high. I held my breath without meaning to. The pressure in my ears faded, but the silence didn't. The light dipped slightly, like it was adjusting its path. Not wobbling like a balloon, not curving like a drone, just a soft, deliberate change in direction. Then it moved laterally, cutting across the sky in a smooth arc that didn't match the wind direction at all. I checked the treetops. Barely any movement. The clouds above were moving west. The light drifted east. I didn't move. I felt like if I blinked, it would disappear. It drifted behind another cluster of clouds, dimming as the foggy layers passed over it. I waited for it to emerge on the other side. It didn't. I kept staring, counting seconds, trying to predict where it should have come out. 5 seconds. 10, 20. Nothing. Then the silence broke. Not with sound, but with the lack of something. The air felt thinner suddenly, like the humidity had been sucked out of it. Luna backed up until she hit the sliding door and scratched at it, whining now. I finally stepped backward too because the pressure in my ears came back again, this time gentler, like I was adjusting altitude. The sky looked normal now, just clouds moving fast, moonlight cutting through the gaps, the faint orange glow of town hanging beneath everything. But the moment felt wrong, like something had passed through and left the atmosphere settling behind it. I let Luna inside and stepped in after her, leaving the door open just a crack. Part of me wanted to shut it immediately, but the other part felt weirdly drawn to keep watching outside. I turned off the kitchen light, so the reflection wouldn't block my view. The crickets hadn't come back yet. The silence in their place felt too heavy. I watched the sky for a good 2 minutes, waiting for the light to reappear. Nothing happened. The pressure in my ears faded again, slowly this time, like easing out of a deep tunnel. I told myself it could have been anything. A drone with its lights diffused through the moisture, a helicopter moving away silently, the moon reflecting weird off wind-blown mist. But none of those explanations matched the way it moved, or the way the air reacted, or the way the animals went quiet all at once. I closed the sliding door and locked it. I almost never lock it until I go to bed. As I walked through the living room, I felt something shift in the house, like a faint tremor. Just one subtle vibration through the floorboards, not enough to rattle anything, but noticeable enough that I stopped walking. It didn't repeat. Luna didn't react. That made it even stranger. I checked the time on the stove, 9:14 p.m. Then I glanced at the microwave, 9:11. My phone said 9:12. The clocks weren't far apart, but they never disagreed. Not by minutes. And they weren't wrong earlier. I'd checked the stove clock when I started making dinner around 7. Everything had matched then. I didn't try to fix them. Something about adjusting the clocks felt like admitting something unusual had happened. I went back to the sliding door one more time and peered outside. The crickets had finally started up again, but weakly, like they were testing the air first. A breeze moved through the neighborhood, shaking the branches and rustling the leftover rain off the leaves. Everything looked normal, but the silence from earlier still lingered somewhere in the back of my mind, like an imprint. So did the memory of that small floating light, how it drifted with purpose, how it vanished in the middle of open sky, and how the entire environment seemed to respond to it in ways I didn't have words for. I didn't stay up waiting for it to return. I went to bed. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that faint glow moving between the clouds. Too deliberate, too silent, too aware. And every now and then, on completely ordinary nights, my ears popped the same way. And for a few seconds, the world around me holds its breath again. I was staying at my friend Nolan's cabin outside Crestridge for a long weekend. It's the kind of place where cell service drops off completely once you get past the last empty gas station, and the nearest neighbor is a mile down a dirt road that looks more like a dried-up creek bed. The cabin itself wasn't anything special, just a little A-frame with a wood stove and 2 rooms, but the land around it made you feel like you were on another planet. Dense pines, a ridge that blocked the western sky, and nothing but open meadow on the eastern side. The first night was colder than I expected. Not freezing, but cold enough that the windows fogged along the edges and the stove crackled nonstop. I'd fallen asleep on the couch because the bedroom smelled like old paint, and sometime around 5 in the morning, I woke up without knowing why. I didn't hear anything. Didn't feel anything. I just opened my eyes like someone had tapped my shoulder. The first thing I noticed was the brightness. It wasn't daylight, at least not the way dawn normally looks. The sky outside the front windows had this pale glow to it, soft but steady, like someone had stretched a huge fluorescent panel across the horizon. It wasn't shining into the cabin directly, but it brightened everything enough that I didn't need a lamp to see. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes. It didn't make sense. Sunrise wasn't for at least another 40 minutes. Even then, the light spreads gradually, tinting the edges of the landscape before anything gets that bright. This looked like skipping straight ahead to the part where the sun is just below the ridge, but not visible yet. I leaned forward on the couch and checked the clock on Nolan's wall. 5:18 a.m. Way too early. For a minute, I thought maybe the moon was out and hitting some thin layer of fog. But when I looked through the side window, the moon wasn't visible at all. The sky didn't even look like night anymore, just this uniform pale gray blue. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside onto the porch. The cold hit me immediately, sharper than inside. The air smelled like wet bark and dirt, typical for that area. But it was silent, not quiet, silent. No wind, no birds, no creaking trees, just stillness that pressed in around my ears. The strange glow stretched across the entire eastern sky. It wasn't rising or dimming, it just hung there, bright and flat. The ridge behind the cabin blocked the western view completely, but the rest of the sky looked washed out, colorless. At first, I expected it to start spreading the way dawn usually does, widening, softening, changing hue. But it didn't. It stayed the same, as if the sky had forgotten what it was supposed to do. I walked off the porch a little, boots crunching on the frosted grass. The meadow stretched out in front of me, untouched except for an old picnic table Nolan's dad had dragged out there years ago. Even that looked strange in the light, its edges too sharp, too defined, like the glow wasn't shining on it but through it somehow. That's when I noticed something else. The light wasn't spreading outward, it was tightening. Very slowly at first, almost unnoticeable. But after a minute or two, I realized the bright area was shrinking. Not dimming, just pulling inward toward a single point above the horizon. It didn't behave like sunlight or like any natural light I'd seen. It moved with a kind of purpose, contracting in on itself. I should have gone inside right then. I knew that. But I just kept staring because nothing in my brain had a category for what I was seeing. About the time the glow had concentrated into a patch, maybe the width of a house, the pressure in my ears changed. Not painfully, but enough that I swallowed instinctively. The kind of pressure drop you feel before a storm, except the air was clear. I turned around to see if anything behind me had changed. Maybe I was imagining the pressure shift, but everything looked the same. The cabin, the trees, the frost on the windowsill, all normal. When I faced the meadow again, the glow was half its previous size, and it was rising, not like the sun coming up, where the light creeps upward. This patch moved as a whole, lifting straight into the sky like a lantern on a string. The edges stayed crisp, the brightness unchanged. It didn't flicker, it didn't make a sound. I felt something tighten in my chest, a weird mix of fear and curiosity. I tried to convince myself it could be a weather thing, maybe some kind of atmospheric reflection or light pollution bouncing off high clouds. But the sky was clear. There were stars in every direction except where that glow moved. As it rose higher, the meadow darkened beneath it. Dawn returned to the normal, faint pre-light you'd expect at that hour. That contrast made the glow look even stranger, too controlled, too self-contained. Then the glow stopped rising. It hung there for a few seconds, suspended in the air, maybe 1,000 feet up. Still bright, still wrong. It contracted again, faster this time. The circle of light folded inward like something pulling tight fabric. The sky around it darkened so quickly that it felt like someone unplugged the world. A blink later, the glow vanished completely. No fade, no trail, just gone. And the sky snapped back to its true pre-dawn darkness, stars intact. I stood there frozen, waiting for something else to happen. A sound, a flicker, anything. But nothing changed. The meadow looked normal again. My breath came out in fog. A few birds started calling in the trees behind the cabin, like dawn had actually resumed on its rightful schedule. When I went back inside, the clock read 5:26 a.m. 8 minutes. That's how long the whole thing lasted. Maybe less. I sat on the couch without turning on a light. My hands were shaking a little, but not from the cold. I tried to replay the whole thing in my head, but it didn't feel real. It felt staged somehow, like I'd watched something happen behind glass that I wasn't supposed to see. A little after 6, the real sunrise started. Gently, slowly, the way it always does. No strange brightness, no abrupt shifts, just normal daylight creeping into the cabin. I didn't mention it to Nolan when he drove up later that morning. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. Even now, it barely feels like something that happened to me. But whenever I think about that moment, the way the light pulled upward against everything I understood, it still makes me stop what I'm doing and listen to the sky, just to make sure it isn't happening again. I noticed the light before I noticed anything else. It was late, close to 11, and I was taking my usual loop around my neighborhood in Bloomington to get some air before bed. The sky was overcast, that dull orange-gray you get from the streetlights reflecting off clouds. Nothing about the night felt strange at first, just warm, quiet, a little humid. I was halfway down Larkspur Drive when I saw it, a dim white light hanging above a rooftop maybe 4 houses ahead of me on the right. At first, I thought it was someone's security light, or maybe a drone somebody was messing around with, but it didn't move at all. It just hovered there, maybe 20 feet above the shingles. Too low for a plane, too steady for anything handheld. I stopped walking without thinking. The houses around me were dark except for a couple of porch lights. The one with the light above it was completely dark. No TV glow, no inside lamps, nothing. The street itself was dead quiet. No cars, no dogs, just that soft hum you get from the intersection a block over. The light didn't flicker. It didn't sway. It just held its place like it was pinned to the air. I kept staring at it, trying to make sense of the distance. It wasn't bright enough to be a helicopter's spotlight or anything like that. It didn't cast any noticeable beam down onto the roof. It was more like a dull, solid orb, the size of a softball maybe, glowing but contained. Almost like it didn't light up the air around it, only itself. I walked a little farther, slowly, because something in me didn't want to get closer too fast. I couldn't hear anything from it. No buzzing, no motor, no sound at all. If it had been a drone, I would have heard the rotors from that distance, especially at night. But the air was still. When I moved closer, the light didn't respond. It didn't shift or blink or get brighter. It was unnerving how steady it was. The houses on that street sit pretty close to one another, maybe 20 feet between them. The light hovered right over the ridge of the roof, exactly centered, like whatever it was had chosen the spot deliberately. When I reached the house across the street from it, I stopped again. I felt hesitant, I guess, but not scared yet. More confused than anything. I glanced around to see if anyone else was outside. No movement in windows, no cars passing, nothing. The whole street felt paused. The light finally changed right as I opened my mouth to call out, though I don't know who I thought I'd be calling to. It didn't flicker or fade, it just started rising. Smooth and perfectly vertical. No acceleration, just moving like it had been attached to an invisible string being pulled upward. I followed it with my eyes as it climbed above the roofline, then above the big maple tree in the yard next door, then above the streetlights. It didn't blink or wobble, it didn't get brighter or dimmer. It stayed the same muted white glow as it went up. It disappeared so abruptly I didn't register the moment it vanished. 1 second it was there, halfway up the cloud cover. The next, the spot was blank like it had never been lit at all. No streak, no fade out, just gone. I kept standing there like an idiot, waiting for it to come back, but the sky looked normal again. Just that washed out nighttime orange. Something about how suddenly it vanished made my chest tighten. I started walking again, even though my legs felt shaky, like they were filled with buzzing soda water. By the time I was at the end of the block, I heard a noise behind me. Something small, like a click or a snap. It came from one of the yards across the street. I stopped. The noise didn't repeat. There was no movement, no light, nothing. But I got the weirdest urge to hurry home, like the quiet itself had turned into a warning. I walked faster. As I was turning onto my street, I noticed something else. The cicadas had stopped. They'd been loud that whole week, but now the air was dead silent. Even the distant traffic noise from the main road seemed lower, like someone had turned the city down a notch. For a moment, I wondered if there'd been some kind of power issue. The house where the light had hovered had no visible lights on, but so did plenty of other houses. People just went to bed early around here. The streetlights were still on, though. Everything looked normal. But then my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, thinking maybe I had a text, but it wasn't a notification. The screen had turned white. Just a flat white rectangle. No icons, no time, nothing. I tapped it a few times and it didn't respond. I pressed the side button and the screen stayed lit. The device vibrated again, a short tremor like a heartbeat. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even slow down. I shoved the phone into my pocket and headed straight for my house. The silence felt thicker the closer I got, like the whole block was wrapped in insulation. When I reached my driveway, I had this moment where I didn't want to look up. I can't explain why. I just felt like something would be there if I checked, above the house, above the tree in the yard, above me. Not another light. Just something occupying space it shouldn't. But I did look up, and there was nothing. Just clouds. Inside, the house felt too warm, like someone had closed every vent. I turned on the kitchen light and stood there, waiting for something else to glitch or blink or hum. Nothing did. The fridge kicked on, the AC finally rattled awake. The normal house sounds came back gradually, like someone releasing their hand from my ears. My phone rebooted on its own about 5 minutes later. When it came back on, the clock was wrong. Not by hours, just by a few minutes. I checked the camera roll to see if something had triggered the white screen. No new photos, no corrupted files. Everything normal. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept replaying the way the light rose. So smooth, so straight, like it didn't care about gravity at all. Nothing I've ever seen moves like that. Not balloons, not aircraft, not drones. It didn't even seem to push against the air. Over the next few days, I tried to walk the same route at the same time, hoping maybe I'd see something that would make the whole thing feel more explainable, like a reflection or someone's weird backyard gadget or something. But the house where it hovered stayed dark every night, and nothing unusual showed up. A week later, I finally saw the family who lived there, an older couple named the Merricks, watering their flower beds. I didn't ask them anything. I thought about it, but what would I say? Hey, did you notice a floating light above your roof the other night? They'd think I was messing with them. It hasn't happened again. I still walk some nights, but I catch myself glancing at the rooftops more often than I used to. And every once in a while, when the neighborhood gets too quiet too suddenly, I feel that same pressure in my chest, like something is hovering just out of sight, waiting for the clouds to thin. I was driving back from my coworker Jenna's place on a Tuesday night, a little after 11. She lived out past the edge of town, one of those new developments built next to miles of empty fields. But the drive was usually quick, just 15 minutes along County Road 12, a straight shot with barely any traffic that late. I'd done it dozens of times. The night was clear, cool, nothing unusual. I wasn't tired, just ready to get home, shower, and crash. I remember thinking how bright my headlights looked when I pulled onto the county road, slicing across the gravel shoulder and lighting up the asphalt in a clean beam. Then, maybe 3 minutes into the drive, the beams started to dull. Not flicker, just fade. It happened slowly, like the darkness ahead thickened and swallowed some of the light. At first, I thought maybe my high beams had switched off accidentally, but the dashboard icon was still lit. The headlights were technically on, but they weren't doing their job. Everything 10 or 15 feet ahead of my bumper looked softer, muted, like I'd driven into a faint fog even though the air was perfectly clear. I tapped the lights off and on again. No change. The road kept absorbing the brightness like it was endless cloth. I tried to tell myself it was just some trick of the air or humidity, but my hands had tightened on the wheel. My chest felt tense in a way I didn't have a name for. A moment later, the radio, just background music I barely paid attention to, cut out mid-song. No static, no warning, just silence. The screen still showed it was playing, but no sound came through. The silence in the car felt too absolute, like the air inside thickened too. That's when I saw the glow. It was faint, suspended above the road maybe 100 yards ahead. Not bright enough to light anything around it. Not shaped like anything I could identify. Just a pale smudge of light, hanging in place like someone had pressed their thumb against the sky and left a soft print behind. It didn't move toward me or away. It stayed exactly where it was. I slowed down without deciding to, dropped from 50 to 30, then to 20. The glow stayed the same size the entire time, which made no sense. If it were far away, it shouldn't look identical at different speeds. If it were close, I would have reached it already. The dimming headlights almost made it worse. They illuminated the road just enough to make the darkness around the glow feel unnatural, like the light from the car and the glow overhead were refusing to interact. Then my dashboard clock flickered. It jumped from 11:14 to 11:17. Just like that. No fade, no glitch. A 3-minute skip. I breathed out hard through my nose, trying to steady myself. I'd had electrical issues in cars before, but nothing like this. The engine still ran smoothly. The steering felt normal, but everything else, the lights, the radio, the display, seemed to react to whatever was up ahead. At about 50 yards away, the faint glow started to dim. Not suddenly, almost reluctantly, like it was losing interest. First, it thinned around the edges, then the center faded until it dissolved completely. The headlights seemed to strengthen the moment it disappeared, brightening back to their proper level as if someone had lifted a shade from in front of them. I drove forward slowly until I reached the exact stretch of road where the glow had been. There was nothing there. No fog, no insects, no light reflecting off low clouds. The asphalt looked the same as always, gray, cracked, barely maintained. The fields on both sides were silent except for the sound of the engine idling. The radio came back on, picking up in the middle of the exact same song, like it had never paused. The headlights stayed strong. Even the night itself seemed to return to normal, as if whatever had been there was gone for good. I sat there in the middle of the road, engine running, trying to make sense of what happened. I checked my phone, still on 11:17. The car clock matched it. 3 minutes missing from somewhere I couldn't account for, even though I remembered every second of the drive. I kept expecting another faint glow to appear overhead, or the lights to dim again, but nothing happened. Eventually, I put the car in gear and kept driving. That should have been the end of it. But about a mile down the road, I passed an area where the field grass grew taller than the fence posts. As my headlights swept across the tall grass, the beam bent, not sharply, not dramatically, but enough that the edges of the light curved inward, like it was bending around something I couldn't see. There was nothing in front of me. Nothing casting shadows, nothing blocking the light. Yet, the edges of the beam curved for a full second before snapping back to normal. It was so quick I almost thought I imagined it, but the hairs on my arms lifted immediately. My foot eased off the gas. My heartbeat picked up again. Whatever passed over the road earlier hadn't just been light. It altered something in the air, like the space itself had been warped or stretched for a moment and then reset. I didn't stop this time. I just kept driving. When I finally reached the turn toward my neighborhood, the street lamps looked brighter than usual. Almost too bright, like my eyes were still adjusting from something I couldn't see anymore. My porch lights were on when I got home, even though I never leave them on when I go out. The dog next door barked once, short and confused, then went silent. Inside the house, everything was normal. My phone didn't glitch. The wall clock matched the car. But for the rest of the night, every time I walked past a window, I half expected to see a faint glow hovering above the street, waiting the way it had waited over the road. I didn't see it again. The night passed without anything else strange happening. But every time I drive that same route now, especially when it's late and quiet, I keep my eyes on the stretch where the light once hung. The headlights seem to dim just the tiniest bit whenever I reach it, only for a moment. So subtle, I almost convince myself it isn't real. Almost. I know what dimmed headlights look like. I know what fog and high beams and clouds do. And what I saw that night wasn't any of those things. It was like something else was absorbing the light, something waiting there in the dark, suspended above the road, long enough for me to notice, and long enough to know exactly when to disappear. I was walking home from the bus stop after my late shift, the kind of slow walk you do when you're too tired to hurry, but not tired enough to sit down. It was close to midnight, cool for early October, with that crisp air that makes sounds carry a little farther than they should. My apartment was about 8 blocks from the stop, through a quiet suburban neighborhood in Kent, Washington. Most of the houses were dark, a few porch lights still on, everything normal, at least at first. The first weird thing happened before I even reached the second block. I noticed the streetlight ahead of me dim just a bit, not flicker, just a drop in brightness, like someone turned a knob down for half a second. I didn't think much about it. These lights were old and buzzed constantly, so a little dimming didn't seem surprising. But then the next one dimmed too when I got close, and the next. I slowed down, trying not to overthink it. Maybe there was some power thing going on. Maybe the grid was shifting load. Stuff like that happens. But it kept happening in the same way, each streetlight slightly lowering its brightness as I passed underneath it, then going back to normal once I walked on. I stopped under one and looked straight up at it. It hummed softly, the same as it always did. Nothing unusual. I waited a moment, nothing changed. But when I took another step forward, the next light down the street dimmed. Just that one. Just as I moved, I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, a timing thing. Maybe I hadn't walked home this late enough to notice how the lights behaved. But my chest felt tight in a way that didn't line up with any reasonable explanation. About halfway home, I noticed the neighborhood was quieter than normal. Usually you'd hear at least a dog barking somewhere, or a TV muffled through a window, or traffic from the main road. But everything felt dampened. Not silent, just muted. like someone had put a blanket over the world. A block later, I heard something like a soft electrical hum. It wasn't coming from the streetlights. They had their own distinct buzz I'd learned to ignore. This was deeper, steadier, and it didn't seem to come from any direction. It just hung in the air. I tried to pinpoint it, turning my head, but the hum stayed the same, no matter where I faced. I hadn't seen anyone since getting off the bus. No cars passed, no one walking their dog. It was just me on the sidewalk and this strange tension in the air. I checked my phone, even though I wasn't expecting anything. The screen brightness looked off, dimmer than usual somehow, even at max. A weird brownish tint clung to the edges, but when I blinked it looked normal again. The battery icon flickered once. Then everything steadied. That's when I realized the streetlight 2 blocks ahead had already dimmed, even though I wasn't anywhere near it yet. I froze. My breath felt trapped in my throat. The light stayed dim for maybe 2 seconds, then returned to full brightness. I kept walking because I didn't know what else to do. My apartment wasn't far now. I kept my hands in my jacket pockets, trying to look normal, like nothing was bothering me. But every step made me feel more exposed. The streetlights continued their strange behavior, either dimming as I approached, or now, dimming before I even got close, like something else was moving along the street ahead of me. I didn't hear anything new. No footsteps, no car engine, just the steady low hum in the air. When I reached the long straight stretch with no cross streets, the sky over the neighborhood caught my attention. At first, I thought it was just a cloud drifting across, but the shape wasn't right. It was too uniform, too smooth. A faint glow, pale, almost bluish, moved across the sky, slow and steady. It didn't light up the rooftops or the ground. It didn't cast any shadows. It was just there, passing overhead with this disconnected calmness that made my skin crawl. I stopped walking again. The glow moved straight across my field of vision. Not bright, not fast, just deliberate. The kind of motion that makes you realize you don't have a category to put it in. As it passed overhead, the hum around me seemed to thicken. Not louder, just more noticeable, like it was inside my chest instead of around me. Then the glow faded behind a thin stretch of clouds and disappeared entirely. No gradual dimming, no drift into distance, just gone. Right after it vanished, the streetlight nearest me snapped back to full brightness in a way I felt more than saw. 1 second dim, next second sharper, almost harsh. The other streetlights along the block brightened too, all at once, as if someone had turned the neighborhood back on. And the hum stopped. Not faded, stopped. The sudden return of normal nighttime sounds almost startled me. A dog barked somewhere. A car passed on the main road. A vent fan clicked on from a nearby house. Everything felt too loud, even though it was all everyday stuff. I forced myself to keep walking, even though every instinct told me to stay still. My keys felt slippery in my palm as I tightened my grip on them. I tried not to look up again, but my eyes kept flicking toward the sky, searching for the glow. There was nothing now, just stars and a thin strip of cloud. I reached my apartment building a few minutes later. The front porch light didn't dim when I stepped beneath it. The hallway lights inside didn't flicker. Everything seemed normal. But when I locked my door behind me, I realized my hands were shaking. I sat on the couch for a while without turning on the TV or any music, listening to the familiar hum of the fridge, the occasional thump from the upstairs neighbor. All the normal background noise I'd never paid attention to suddenly felt grounding, safe. I didn't see anything else that night. Nothing strange happened the next day either. I even walked the same route again just to prove to myself that the lights wouldn't dim like that. They didn't. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm coming home from a shift, I'll catch myself checking the sky for that faint glow, half expecting the streetlights to respond to something I can't see. I was sitting by Lake Meriden the night it happened, the kind of early autumn evening where the cold sneaks in slowly and the air feels thinner than usual. My friend Caleb had invited me to come camping with him and his girlfriend, but work ran late, and by the time I made it out there, both of them were already asleep in their tent across the clearing. I didn't feel like crawling into mine yet, so I pulled a folding chair near the shoreline and just sat there listening to the water push up against the rocks. There wasn't much wind. The surface of the lake looked flat, almost glassy, reflecting the moon in long, shaky lines. I remember thinking how still everything felt. Even the tree line across the lake looked like a silhouette drawn in marker, too sharp, too still. I'd been sitting there maybe 15 minutes when the glow appeared. It started as a faint smudge under the water, maybe 20 yards out. At first I thought it was moonlight catching on something, maybe a sandbar or a shallow patch. But the glow strengthened, gathering into a defined shape. Not round, not anything recognizable, more like a thin band of white light, soft at the edges, cutting across the dark water. I leaned forward a little, trying not to make any noise. The glow moved, not drifting, not bobbing, moving in a perfectly straight line at a steady pace, like it was following a track laid beneath the lake. It didn't ripple the surface. It didn't disturb the water at all. It just slid forward, brightening slightly as it went. I checked behind me, wondering if someone had turned on a lantern or a flashlight, but the campsite was dark. Caleb and Jenna's tent was zipped up tight, no shadows inside. My own lantern was off. When I looked back, the glow had covered another few yards, still keeping the exact same depth under the surface, maybe 3 or 4 feet down. I could see the rocks on the lake bed above it, faintly lit from below like stage lights. The water stayed completely calm. My brain scrambled for explanations. A boat? Some kind of underwater drone? But nothing mechanical moved like that. Slow, silent, perfectly level. And the shape wasn't solid. It looked more like light bending through clear plastic, except there was no plastic and no object, just the glow. I stood up without meaning to. My chair scraped softly against the dirt. The glow kept moving, unaffected. That detail has stuck with me more than anything. It didn't react to me at all. Not when I stood, not when I stepped closer to the water's edge. It was as if I wasn't even there. The glow advanced until it was maybe 10 yards out. Close enough that I could make out the lake floor. Pale rocks, long weeds drifting slightly, lit by this strange, directionless brightness. Then it began to fade, not suddenly, just thinning, like fog dissolving. The straight line movement didn't change. It kept sliding forward, even as it dimmed until the last visible trace of it vanished into darkness. It disappeared well before it reached the shore, like whatever caused it had stopped just short of touching land. I stayed there another minute, staring at the spot where it should have emerged. Nothing. No bubbles, no fish scattering, no sound, just still water and moonlight. I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My hands were shaking. Not from cold, I'd barely noticed the temperature until then. Behind me, a tent zipper sounded. Caleb's head popped out. "Dude, are you okay?" he whispered. I turned around too fast. "Did you see that?" "See what?" "The light, under the water." He squinted past me toward the lake. I didn't see anything. "You good?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Trying to explain it out loud felt impossible. Like the moment I described it, it would stop being something real and turn into a weird story people shrug off. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'm fine." He watched me a second longer, then ducked back into the tent. The zipper rasped shut and everything went quiet again. I didn't go back to the chair. I walked along the shoreline instead, scanning the water. Every few steps I stopped and crouched, waiting to see even a flicker of that glow. Lake Meriden was still and dark, the kind of darkness water takes on when the moon hides behind thin clouds. Nothing appeared. But while I stood there, feeling the cold seep through my jacket, I realized something else. The lake smelled different. Usually it had that strong mineral smell, like every bit of vegetation had been soaking for a century. But now it smelled faint, neutral, almost clean. The air felt heavy too, dense in a way I'd only ever experienced before a thunderstorm, except there wasn't a storm in sight. I walked the shoreline until my toes went numb, then forced myself back to the campsite. I sat in my tent with the lantern low, trying to read, but my eyes kept drifting to the fabric walls, half expecting to see light bleed through from somewhere outside. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I woke up early and walked to the lake again. The water looked exactly like it always did. A few ducks paddled near the reeds. Someone farther down the shore was casting a fishing line into the shallows. I walked to the exact spot where I'd seen the glow disappear. The rocks looked ordinary. The water was so clear I could see the bottom. Nothing unusual, nothing disturbed. When Caleb came over with coffee, he asked again if I was sure I'd been okay the night before. I told him I just hadn't slept well. He shrugged and didn't push it. Before we packed up camp, I took one last look at the lake. I don't know what I expected. A weird ripple, a patch of discolored water, anything. But it looked peaceful. Normal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that while I'd been staring at it, something deep under the surface had been staring back. I haven't been back since. I noticed him the first time because he was sitting in the wrong place. I worked the front desk at a small outpatient clinic in Mesa, Arizona. Nothing dramatic. Beige walls, bad art, the smell of disinfectant, and burnt coffee. Patients checked in, sat down, stared at their phones, got called back. The lobby had a very obvious flow to it. If you were waiting, you sat facing the TV or the windows. The chairs by the elevator were technically for overflow, but no one ever used them unless the place was packed. It was around 8:15 in the morning, already hot outside, that dry desert heat that felt wrong before noon. I was logging someone into the system when I looked up and saw a man sitting in one of the elevator chairs. Just one chair pulled slightly away from the others, angled so he could see straight down the hall. He wasn't looking at the TV. He wasn't on his phone. He was watching the elevator doors. I remember thinking maybe he was early for an appointment upstairs. That happened sometimes, but usually people hovered near the call button or stood. They didn't sit like they were settling in for a long wait. He looked normal enough at a glance, mid-30s maybe. Dark hair cut short, clean-shaven, plain gray button-up shirt, dark pants, no jacket, no bag. His hands were folded loosely in his lap. After a few minutes, it started to bother me that he hadn't checked in. We had a sign-in tablet right on the counter. Big and obvious. People missed it sometimes, but not for that long. I finished with the patient in front of me and called out, "Sir, if you're here for an appointment, you'll need to sign in." He didn't react. Not even a flicker. Didn't turn his head. Didn't shift. Nothing. Just kept staring at the elevator doors like he was waiting for them to open on their own. I thought maybe he had headphones in, but I couldn't see any. I tried again, a little louder. Still nothing. That's when I really looked at him. His eyes were open, but not focused on anything specific. They tracked the elevator panel when the light above it flicked on for another floor, then went back to the scene between the doors. A patient came out of the elevator then, and the doors opened right in front of him. He leaned back slightly to give them space, but didn't look at the person. The doors closed again, and he leaned forward to his original position. I didn't push it. I told myself he was waiting for someone. Or maybe he was confused. We got a lot of confused people. Around 9:30, he stood up and walked out. I didn't see him sign out. I didn't hear the door. 1 second he was there, the next time I glanced over, the chair was empty. The second day, he was there when I arrived. Same chair, same posture, same clothes. It was 7:55 a.m. The lobby had just opened. Third grass, no patients yet, just me, the cleaning crew finishing up, and him. I stopped just inside the door and stood there longer than I should have, watching him. He was already staring at the elevator. I asked the cleaner, Rosa, if she'd seen him come in. She frowned and said, "Who?" I pointed. She looked where I was pointing and then back at me. "Girl," she said quietly, "there's no one there." I looked again. He was still there, still watching. I laughed it off, embarrassed, and said, "Never mind." Rosa left a few minutes later, shaking her head like I was messing with her. I watched him for most of the morning. He never moved except to adjust slightly when the elevator opened. Never checked his phone. Never spoke. Never signed in. At one point, a kid started crying in the lobby, loud and sudden. Everyone jumped. He didn't. I finally called security around 10. Just asked them to send someone to check on a guy who might be lost or having a medical issue. While I was on the phone, I glanced over again. The chair was empty. Security came anyway. Walked the lobby, checked the bathrooms, shrugged, asked for a description. When I described him, the guard frowned and said no one matching that had come through. The third day, I told myself I wouldn't look. I failed about 30 seconds after sitting down. He was back. Same spot. Same clothes. Same stillness. This time, the air conditioning felt too loud. Every sound felt like it echoed. I couldn't stop thinking about Rosa not seeing him, or how security hadn't seen him leave. I didn't call out to him. I didn't call security. I just watched. Around noon, one of the nurses, Kyle, came up to the desk and followed my gaze. "You keep staring at that chair," he said. "Do you see him?" I asked. "See who?" My stomach dropped. I didn't answer. I just shook my head. He left again sometime in the afternoon. I didn't notice him go. I just realized at some point that the chair was empty. That night, I asked our office manager if we could pull the lobby cameras. I said a patient had complained about someone making them uncomfortable. She agreed. We sat in her office after closing, the desert sky outside already dark and cooling fast. We scrubbed through 3 days of footage. The lobby was empty every morning until patients arrived. The chairs by the elevator were always empty. No man, no movement, no sign of anyone sitting there. On the third day's footage, I watched myself stare at an empty chair for hours. I didn't come in the next day. I called out sick and stayed home, curtains drawn, trying not to picture that chair. When I went back the day after that, the chairs by the elevator were gone. Facilities said they'd been removed months ago. No one remembered them being there at all. The elevator still opened and closed. I stopped watching it. They rolled in just before closing, right when the heat finally started to let up. I was wiping my hands on a rag, thinking about locking the bay doors, when the black sedan eased into the gravel lot like it already knew where to stop. No music, no engine rev, nothing rattling, just tires crunching and then stillness. It parked crooked, half in the shade, half in the sun. First thing I noticed was the plates, or the lack of them. No front, no back, not even a temporary tag in the window. That wasn't unheard of out there, not completely. I ran a small shop off a 2-lane highway in eastern Nevada, 40 minutes from the nearest real town. People passed through with all kinds of problems that they didn't want questions about. As long as they paid and didn't cause trouble, I fixed what I could. 2 men got out. They didn't rush, didn't stretch, just stepped out and stood there for a second like they were waiting for something else to happen. Both wore dark jackets, even though it was still close to 90 out. One was tall and thin, with sharp cheekbones and hair combed flat against his head. The other was shorter, heavier, with a round face and a faint smile that never quite went away. The tall one spoke. "You still open?" "For a bit," I said. "What's the issue?" "Stalling," he said. "Happens when we slow down." I nodded and gestured them toward the bay. "Pop the hood." The shorter man walked around and did it himself, didn't fumble for the latch, just reached under like he'd done it 100 times. The engine bay looked clean. Too clean. No dust, no oil mist, no grime baked on from years of heat. I remember thinking it looked like something you'd see in a brochure, not on a car that had been driving through the desert. I leaned in, braced my hands on the frame, and started checking the obvious things. Hoses, belts, connections. Everything felt normal. Solid, warm. The tall man stood close, watching my hands instead of my face. "Did it make any noise when it stalled?" I asked. "No," he said. "No warning lights?" "No." I hooked up my scanner. It didn't throw any codes. That annoyed me more than anything. Cars don't just stall for no reason. I asked how long it had been happening. "Several weeks," the shorter one said. "And you didn't bring it in sooner?" "We weren't nearby," he said. I worked in silence for a while. The air smelled like hot metal and old oil, the usual. Sweat ran down my back. The men didn't move, didn't talk to each other, didn't check their phones. At one point, I realized I couldn't hear the engine running. I straightened up. "Did you turn it off?" The tall man shook his head. "It's on." I leaned back in. The belts weren't moving. The fan wasn't spinning. No vibration through the frame. Nothing. I frowned, reached inside, and turned the key myself. Nothing changed. That should have scared me more than it did. Instead, I told myself something electrical was wrong. Ignition, maybe. I shut it off and told them I'd take it for a quick test drive. The tall man said, "That won't be necessary." "Kind of is," I said. "Hard to diagnose otherwise." They exchanged a look, not alarmed, just coordinated. "Very well," the shorter one said. I backed the car out. It rolled smoothly, no resistance. When I turned the key again, the dash lights came on like normal. I put it in drive. It moved. No sound, no vibration, just motion. I drove it maybe 100 yards down the road and back. It responded to the gas, the brakes, the steering. Everything felt fine, except for the part where it shouldn't have been moving at all. I parked it and got out, my hands shaking now. "There's nothing wrong with it," I said. "At least nothing I can find." "That's good," the tall man said. They paid in cash. Exact amount. Crisp bills like they'd come straight from a bank. As they were leaving, the shorter one paused. "While you were working," he said, "did you notice anything unusual?" "No," I said automatically. He smiled a little wider. "Good." They got in, closed the doors, and drove off. Still no sound. I locked up and went home. Tried to forget about it. It wasn't until the next morning, when I was replaying the whole thing in my head, that it clicked. I'd never seen pistons, or a block, or any wiring beyond what should have been there. I'd checked hoses that shouldn't have connected to anything, touched metal that didn't make sense. There hadn't been an engine. I went back to the shop and opened the bay, half expecting to find something left behind. A mark, a smell, anything. There was nothing. Around noon, I stepped outside and looked down the highway. A black sedan passed by, silent as ever, heading east. They caught me at the end of my route, right where the pavement turns to gravel and the signal drops. It was late afternoon, that flat orange light you get before sunset when everything looks tired. I just dropped the last bundle into the outgoing bin at the small cluster of boxes near the feed store. I was already thinking about getting home before dark, maybe grilling something if the weather held. That's when the black sedan pulled up behind my truck. I noticed it because nobody ever came down that road unless they had a reason. No houses, no businesses, just fields and a few barns set way back. The car stopped a few yards behind me, engine still running, no radio, no music. Two men got out. They didn't hurry, but they didn't linger either, walked up like they'd timed it. I stayed where I was, one foot still on the step of my truck. "Afternoon," the taller one said. He had a narrow face, dark hair combed flat, and a smile that showed up fast and stayed too long. The other man stood half a step behind him. Shorter, broader, round face. He smiled too, but his eyes kept drifting, like he was watching the fields on both sides of the road at once. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Yes," the taller one said. "We're following up on a delivery issue." I nodded automatically. "You'll need to call the office." "We already did," the shorter one said. "They suggested we speak with you directly." That didn't sound right, but I didn't argue yet. The taller man pulled out a small notebook. No logo, no badge, just paper. "We're looking for a package that was delivered on your route last Thursday," he said. "Marked as delivered, but not received." I frowned. "You've got the wrong guy. I don't mark anything delivered unless it goes in a box or I hand it off." "Yes," he said. "That's why we're here." "What address?" I asked. He gave me a rural route number that technically existed but hadn't been active in years. The kind of thing you only knew if you'd worked out here a long time. "There's no delivery point there," I said. "Hasn't been for a while." The shorter man nodded, like that confirmed something. "And you're certain you didn't deliver a package there anyway?" "There's nowhere to put it," I said. "No box, no house." The taller man smiled wider. "Could you describe the package?" "I can't describe something that doesn't exist." He wrote that down. I felt a prickle of irritation then. "Look, if something was misdelivered, you need to..." "It wasn't misdelivered," the shorter man said gently. "It was logged correctly." "That doesn't make sense." "It often doesn't," he said. I asked who they were with. "Records," the taller man said. "Postal inspection?" I asked. He hesitated just long enough that I noticed. "Adjacent." That word again. Adjacent. I crossed my arms. "You got names? Badges?" The shorter man smiled. "That won't help?" I laughed once, sharp. "It absolutely will." Instead of answering, the taller man flipped his notebook around. There was my name on the page, my employee number, my route, even my start date, written neatly like it had been copied from a form. "You've been very consistent," he said. "That's appreciated." Consistent with what? With not seeing things that aren't there. I didn't like the way he said that. "Describe your route last Thursday," the shorter man said. "Anything unusual?" "No." "Any delays?" "No." "Any deviations?" "No." They nodded in sync. The shorter man looked out toward the fields. "Did you notice anything on the road? Lights? Vehicles stopped where they shouldn't have been?" "No." "Any boxes without labels?" The taller one added. "No." "Any address that felt incomplete?" I stared at him. "What does that even mean?" He smiled again, like I'd asked a good question. "Then you're confident," the shorter man said, "that no such package existed?" "Yes," I said, "I'm sure." The taller man closed the notebook. "Good, good," I repeated. "Yes," he said. "Thank you for confirming." They stepped back toward their car. Then it's still loose, the shorter man said casually, like he was talking about a dog that had slipped a leash. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air. What's loose? They didn't answer. They got back into the sedan. No door slams, no engine noise change. The car just eased forward, turned around where there wasn't really room to, and headed back the way it came. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to the gravel settle. When I got home that night, I checked my route logs. Everything was normal, no missing scans, no flagged deliveries, but there was an entry I didn't remember making. A scan time-stamped Thursday afternoon, logged at a location that didn't exist anymore. No address, just coordinates. Status marked delivered. I didn't report it. A week later, one of the old barns down that road burned down overnight. No cause found. Nothing inside worth stealing. Sometimes when I'm driving that stretch near the end of my route, I catch myself slowing down, checking the mirrors, half expecting to see a black sedan waiting patiently behind me. So far, I haven't. I was about 4 miles into the Ridgewater Loop when the forest went silent. Not quiet, silent. It happened so suddenly that I stopped mid-step, one boot hovering over the trail, thinking maybe I'd gone temporarily deaf. A second earlier, the woods south of Kalispell had been full of normal noise. Wind in the branches, a distant woodpecker, the trickle of a creek somewhere off to my right. Then, everything cut off at the exact same instant, like someone pressed mute on the entire valley. I set my foot down slowly and turned in a circle. The trees looked the same, tall pines, scattered birch, late-season sunlight patching the ground in broken shapes, but the silence made them feel hollow, like a photograph instead of a real place. I said hello out loud just to break the stillness. The sound of my voice hit the trees strangely, sharp and too close, like the forest had shrunken around me. No echo, no carry, just a flat, clipped noise that dropped off faster than it should have. I tried listening harder, expecting some noise to rise back in, but nothing came. Even the air felt heavy and motionless. My breathing sounded loud enough that I became self-conscious of it. I was alone on the trail. It was a weekday morning in late October, and I hadn't seen another person since the trailhead. I told myself it was just a big predator nearby, a mountain lion maybe, or a bear, and everything else had gone quiet. But I'd lived in Montana long enough to know what that kind of silence felt like. And this wasn't it. This wasn't tension or alertness. This was absence, as if the entire forest was holding its breath for something that hadn't arrived yet. Then I noticed the shimmer. It hung between two narrow pines, maybe 30 feet off the trail. At first I thought sunlight was reflecting off a spider web or a patch of moisture, but the air around it wasn't moving, and the shimmer wasn't on any surface. It hovered. Suspended in midair, a faint wavering of light, no bigger than a backpack, like heat rising off asphalt but colder, sharper. I squinted at it. The shimmer pulsed, not brighter, just steadier. For a brief moment, it held a distinct shape, almost oval, before losing definition again. It wasn't glowing, but it was unmistakably there, warping the view of the tree trunks behind it like a lens shifting focus. The silence pressed harder around me. My heartbeat thumped in my ears, and for a second I thought I might faint from how wrong everything felt. I took one step toward it. Instantly, the shimmer contracted, pulling tight into a smaller shape, like it sensed the movement. Not disappearing, just compressing, almost bracing. I froze again. My throat tightened. I couldn't think of anything to say or do that didn't feel stupid. I kept staring at the distortion, waiting for it to dissolve or drift away or prove itself to be something normal, but it just hovered. The air felt thick around it, heavy, charged in a way I couldn't explain. I had the urge to back up, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like my body didn't trust me to make the right choice. Then, from somewhere behind me, a single branch snapped. In any other situation, that would have been comforting. Natural. But the sound was wrong. It didn't echo. It didn't blend back into the forest. It cut sharply through the silence like it was being played in a separate room. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs. Nothing stood on the trail. No animals. No movement. The branch lay broken across the path, but even that looked strange, like it was sharper in color than the things around it. When I turned back to the shimmer, it had stretched vertically, as if rising. The distortion elongated between the trunks, pulling upward like a strip of warped glass being lifted. It didn't brighten or darken, just shifted shape unnaturally, bending the trees behind it until they looked bowed. A soft vibration started in my jaw. At first, I thought it was a muscle twitch from adrenaline, but the vibration grew steadier, humming through my teeth and into my ears. Not a sound exactly, more like pressure. The same kind you get before a storm hits, except focused in a single spot. The shimmer pulsed again, and just as I took a breath, the forest noise came back all at once, not gradually, like a switch flipping. Birds chattered overhead, winds stirred the needles. Somewhere far off, the creek resumed its trickling. Every sound snapped into place instantly, too loud after the silence. The shimmer dissolved. It didn't fade or drift. It collapsed inward in a split second, like a bubble popping, but without any movement of air. The trees behind it returned to normal clarity. The air loosened. The vibration in my jaw stopped. I staggered back, suddenly aware that I'd been leaning forward without meaning to. For a moment, I couldn't decide whether to run or pretend nothing had happened. My body chose for me. I started walking quickly down the trail, almost tripping over my own boots. The normal sounds of the forest followed me, but they felt foreign, like they were trying too hard to act natural. About 10 minutes later, I stopped to catch my breath and realized something else was wrong. I couldn't remember the last minute of walking. Not in a lost time way, more like my brain had skipped recording it. One moment I was leaving the area where the shimmer had been, and the next I was farther down the trail with no memory of what happened in between. My heart rate was still elevated, so I knew I'd been moving quickly, but everything between those points felt blank. I checked my phone, 10:14 a.m. I hadn't looked at it since I'd left the trailhead 3 hours earlier. Everything seemed normal, battery percentage, time, notifications, but when I tried to pull up a map just to orient myself, the screen refused to load anything. GPS was blank. The compass spun slowly without stabilizing. I turned the phone off and back on. Same thing. I shoved it in my pocket and kept walking. When I finally reached the trailhead, a pair of hikers were getting ready to start their loop. They nodded at me casually, and I managed to nod back, but I could barely look them in the eye. I didn't want to say anything because I had no idea what there was to say. I got into my car and sat for a long time before turning the engine over. My hands were still shaking. The entire drive home, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the air behind the car shimmering. Nothing followed me. Nothing hovered above the road. Nothing appeared in my peripheral vision. But that night, when I closed my eyes, I saw the moment the forest fell silent. I heard the absence more clearly than the sounds that came back afterward. And I felt the vibration in my jaw, a deep, steady pressure that seemed to come from inside the woods themselves. The next morning, out of curiosity, I checked my phone again. The GPS worked, the compass worked, everything was normal. Except for one detail. The last recorded location on my hiking app, a breadcrumb from the auto-tracking feature I didn't even realize was on, showed a single point off the trail, about 30 feet from where I had been standing, right where the shimmer had been hanging between the trees. I was driving back from Thompson Falls late on a Sunday night, taking the long stretch of Highway 200 that follows the river. It was cold enough for frost to form on the edges of the windshield, but not quite snowing, one of those dry Montana nights where everything feels sharper and quieter than usual. I'd stayed too long at a friend's place, lost track of time, and now I had an hour's drive home in near total darkness. The only other car I'd seen in 20 minutes was a logging truck heading the opposite direction. After that, it was just me, the hum of my old Subaru, and the pale yellow beam of the headlights cutting through the dark. I remember adjusting the heater and glancing down for just a second. When I looked back up, the headlights reflected off something in midair. A sharp flash, clean, metallic, unmistakably reflective, right above the road and maybe 30 feet ahead. High enough that it wasn't on the ground, but low enough that if it had been a sign, I would have known the stretch. I slowed down immediately, leaning forward over the wheel. My first thought was that maybe it was a piece of equipment hanging from a power line. But the power lines along that road run farther inland, not directly overhead. I rolled down the window a few inches, listening. Nothing. No engine noise except mine. No wind. The river on my right sounded quieter than usual, almost muted. Even the tires on the asphalt seemed too soft, like the road was absorbing the sound. I eased the car to the shoulder and stopped completely. My hands were tight on the wheel without me realizing it. I looked up toward the spot where the reflection had come from. Nothing there. Just empty air and a perfectly normal dark sky. No sign, no wire, no bird, nothing that could have thrown back such a bright, clean flash. I turned off the headlights to see better. That was a mistake. The darkness closed in so fast it felt physical. A heavy, absolute black that swallowed the road and the trees. I switched them back on immediately, heart skipping. As the light flooded the road again, I saw something drift across the beam. Not an object, more like a distortion. The kind of shimmer you see above asphalt on a hot day, but this was winter, late at night, and it passed horizontally across the beam like a soft ripple in the air. I held my breath. The shimmer slowed, then stopped directly in front of the car. For a moment, the headlights looked slightly dimmer, like they were being absorbed by whatever I was looking at. Then the distortion collapsed inward, almost like it folded into itself. The headlights brightened again, and everything looked normal. I stayed parked for a long moment, trying to steady my breathing. The cold coming through the cracked window felt oddly warm in the chest, like my own body couldn't figure out how to regulate my reaction. I was about to pull back onto the road when I heard a faint clicking sound. It came from the direction of the trees across the road. Slow, inconsistent clicks, like someone tapping metal lightly against metal. They weren't rhythmic, but they also weren't random. It reminded me of someone trying out unfamiliar tools. I shut the window. The clicking got quieter but didn't stop. I turned on the high beams, pointing them toward the tree line. Nothing, just pines and bare branches. But the clicking stopped the moment the high beams hit. I shifted in my seat, put the car in drive, and eased forward. For the first 100 yards, nothing happened. I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see someone or something step into the road behind me. The headlights illuminated the asphalt in a long, bright stretch, uninterrupted. Then the reflection flashed again, this time off to the left. Not as bright, but unmistakably metallic. I slowed down again, but didn't stop. My pulse was hammering too hard. As I coasted past the spot where the flash had been, the radio crackled. I didn't even realize the radio was on. It had been silent for the whole drive. But it crackled sharply twice and then went dead again. Not static, not music, just two bursts of white noise. The dashboard lights dimmed for half a second. I gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles hurt. "Come on," I whispered to the car, or maybe to myself. "Just keep going." The rest of the road ahead looked clear. Nothing unusual, nothing metallic, but the air felt off. Heavier, denser, like I'd driven into a pocket where the atmosphere wasn't behaving right. I rolled the window down again, only an inch, just enough to hear the world. The river should have been loud, running full and cold this time of year. Instead, it sounded like it was farther away than it really was, like the road had pulled back from it. The clicking returned. This time, closer, much closer. Off to my right, not in the trees now, near the guardrail. Metal on metal, slow taps, almost curious. Instinct took over. I accelerated. Not dangerously, but quickly, like getting distance was the only thing that mattered. The clicking faded behind me, swallowed by normal road noise. The air pressure in the cabin eased, and my ears cleared as though I'd been descending a hill, even though the elevation was flat. After another mile, the headlights reflected off a normal road sign. That shouldn't have reassured me as much as it did, but it did. I finally exhaled. I kept driving, checking the mirrors constantly, waiting for the reflection to reappear or the radio to crackle again. But the road stayed empty, boring, familiar. The sky stayed black. The river sounded normal again. By the time the first lights of Noxon appeared in the distance, I'd convinced myself to keep going all the way home rather than pulling over. My hands didn't fully stop shaking until I was parked in my driveway. Inside, I sat down on the floor by the bed, not sure why, and tried to slow my breathing. Then my phone buzzed. A notification I'd never seen before. Motion detected ahead, 11:42 p.m. My phone didn't have any motion detection apps installed. It didn't have anything that should have triggered that kind of alert. I checked the timestamp, 11:42 p.m., exactly the minute I'd seen the first flash hanging in the air. The alert disappeared as quickly as it came, like it had never been real. When I tried to tap it, it was gone. I didn't sleep much that night. For days afterward, every reflective surface, not just metal, but glass, puddles, anything, made me stiffen. I kept expecting to see something hanging in the air, waiting to reflect the light back at me. It hasn't happened again. But now, every time I drive that stretch of Highway 200, I grip the wheel a little tighter as I round the bends, watching the air just above the road for something metallic, waiting for the light to catch on it again.